Sera, a Dungeon Revival LitRPG. By Mizar Kaf. Chapter 21 Little Thorns. Sera's back pressed into the rough bark of a large tree. The bark's rough surface bit into her skin, as she felt the heartbeat of the forest coursing through the roots beneath her. Her gaze settled on Ermo, who was sprawled on the forest floor. His breaths were deep and each exhalation accompanied by a resonant snore. His beastkin features had softened in sleep, the tension in his muscles dissolved as he reverted to his more human-like form. Sera's fingers lightly traced the grooves in the bark beside her, the texture a stark contrast to the soft moss cushioning her feet. She considered waking Ermo, yet, curiosity kept her rooted in place. She wondered how long it would take for Ermo to wake up by himself. It would inform me more regarding how much of a toll his transformation takes on his body. Minutes trickled by, marked by the subtle rustling of leaves as a gentle breeze whispered through the forest. The sounds of insects buzzing about filled the air, served as a backdrop to Ermo's breathing. Eventually, the beastkin's snoring ceased, replaced by a faint mumbling as he tried to open his eyes. A low groan escaped his lips as consciousness seeped back into his limbs. Sera watched, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips before tapping her foot lightly against the ground. Finally awake. At the sound of her voice, Ermo straightened up immediately, brushing dirt and leaves from his clothes as he stood up. What's up, boss? Why don't you tell me what you remember instead? Did I transform again? You did, and don't worry, the humans from earlier have been dealt with. Ermo shook his head slowly, the motion almost hesitant. His eyes clouded with tears, the shimmering droplets clinging to his lashes. I remember those uniforms, some of them were working with the soldiers that attacked my village. Sera moved away from the tree, lightly brushing the rough bark as she stepped forward. She tapped a finger against her chin, her gaze softening as she studied the beastkin man. Is that why your transformation this time was much stronger than when I first found you? Ermo's hand drifted to the back of his head, scratching absent-mindedly. Didn't really think about it that much, to be completely honest, but I guess so. The crunch of footsteps on the leaf-littered ground broke the moment, drawing their attention. Zoha approached with a measured pace, before bowing deeply before Sera. Forgive me for interrupting, mistress. But I've finished collecting the remains of all the intruders before placing them in the spirit tree's chamber. Thank you, Zoha. Sera then turned her attention towards Ermo, observing the tightness around his jaw and the hard set of his shoulders. She closed the distance between them, stopping just in front of him. You're still bitter, still seeking vengeance. Hard not to be, boss. If given the chance, I'd love to give those bastards a taste of their own medicine. And if I were to take you to Marwood, can you control yourself? Ermo took a step back, his eyes widening in surprise. Boss, you're serious? Sera studied him for a moment. She recalled the first time she had encountered Ermo, and how one of the main reasons he joined her was due to the promise of the beastkin maybe finding his wife in the future. Such loyalty is tenuous at best. I should give him an opportunity to make him feel empowered while still making use of him. Out loud, Sera said, I trust you, Ermo. This is your chance to prove yourself, to show that you can control your anger and use it wisely. And with luck, we could find details about the whereabouts of your wife. Taking a deep breath, Ermo seemed to gather himself before he exhaled slowly. Boss, I promise you that I won't disappoint. Sera nodded once. Without another glance at him, she turned on her heel. And, Zoha, follow me to the spirit tree's chamber. The demoness moved swiftly, slipping seamlessly into step behind Sera. Yes, mistress. Just a few moments after Sera had started walking, her keen senses caught movement to her right as she noticed the rustling of bushes. Sera tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly as she peered at the shifting foliage. Little ones. Soon, all 20 thornlings emerged from the underbrush. The thornlings quickly arranged themselves in a tight circle around Sera, their collective gaze fixed on her with an intensity that spoke volumes. The Elder Dryad's lips curved into a warm smile as she knelt down to their level. Is there something you all wanted to tell me? The thornlings communicated with each other all at once, their high-pitched voices blending into a cacophony of eager sounds. Their excitement was palpable, their tiny bodies vibrating with energy. Sera sighed softly, holding up a hand to calm them. Calm down, please, one at a time. Gradually, the thornlings quieted down and glanced at one another. After a brief moment, a few of them nudged 2 particular thornlings forward, urging them towards Sera. The two hesitant thornlings stumbled slightly before regaining their composure, eyes wide and nervous. What did these two do? Sera asked. One of the thornlings made a series of high-pitched sounds. Sera nodded in understanding as she stood up and fixed her gaze on the two hesitant thornlings. Both of you showed great bravery in attacking the humans, follow me. Sera's gaze drifted over each corpse laid out within the spirit tree's chamber. Zoha, with her characteristic efficiency, dragged the final body into alignment with the others. There were 11 in total, including the man she had previously interrogated. If only there were more of them, but for now, this will have to do. Many of the bodies were charred beyond almost all recognition. Their skin was blistered and blackened, the features melted and distorted into grotesque masks that barely hinted at their former humanity. Hopefully, they will still provide decent experience. The Elder Dryad moved slowly through the grim assembly as she approached the spirit tree. Then, with a deep sigh, she turned her back against it. She felt the now familiar sensation of roots from the tree seeking her out, extending toward her like the fingers of a longing parent. They burrowed gently into her spine, an intimate connection that brought her more comfort than it did pain. Experience extraction initiated. Several slender roots emerged from the soil, their movements almost sentient as they stretched towards the corpses scattered throughout the room. Each tendril, thin and sinewy, glistened with moisture as it coiled around the lifeless forms, weaving through limbs and torsos. Meanwhile, the two thornlings from earlier scuttled closer to Sera's feet, their tiny forms trembling slightly as they tried to avoid the writhing roots. Seeing this, Sera bent down and rubbed both of the thornlings' leaves with gentle strokes. Be at ease, little ones. Her fingers moved tenderly, caressing the delicate foliage with great care. The two thornlings relaxed under her touch. Their quivering subsided, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible purring sound that resonated from deep within their tiny bodies. With the thornlings taken care of, Sera stood up and turned her attention to Zoha, who was standing nearby. She noticed a flicker of uncertainty in the demoness' usually composed features. Her lips parted slightly, as though on the brink of voicing a concern or question that weighed heavily on her mind. Speak your mind, Zoha. Mistress, with all due respect, I believe that bringing Ermo with you to Marwood is a disastrous idea. You're not wrong, and it's certainly not a choice that I would have made under normal circumstances. Then why choose him to accompany you? Unlike you, Ermo isn't bound to a magical contract to me. His loyalty has yet to be completely secured, and here is a chance to offer him some agency while still extracting value from him. That I understand. But that doesn't change the fact that his powers are still volatile, and also, he's not exactly a strong fighter when not transformed. I agree, but I believe that Marwood can be a place where Ermo can develop more control over his powers. The fact is that his transformation is very powerful, even by the standards of a beastkin shifter. And what about a worst-case scenario, mistress? Perhaps Ermo will rampage through the slums for a bit until I calm him down. But, I doubt that the nobles of the kingdom would suddenly care about those living in the slums just because of one disaster. But, in addition, between you and Ermo, I'd prefer if you were the one to look after the dungeon. Your abilities are more reliable and for the most part, I'm of the belief that you'll be able to dispatch any future intruders better than Ermo can. Zoha's initial resistance was still visible in her rigid posture and the slight tightening of her jaw. Her hands clenched momentarily before she exhaled slowly. I understand, mistress. Sera observed Zoha's subtle shift from defiance to acceptance, lips curling into a light chuckle. You still don't sound convinced. Perhaps, but that doesn't mean I won't accept your decision. Don't worry, you will have your chance in due time. As they spoke, the bodies of the 11 intruders began to dissolve, their physical forms breaking down into ethereal wisps of blue energy. The chamber filled with a soft, pulsating glow as each corpse evaporated, leaving behind nothing but floating mana. Experience extraction complete. Core experience updated to 6,000. Once the last of the corpses had vanished, Zoha retrieved her journal and pen from her cloak. She flipped open to a blank page and scribbled down a few words. At the very least, I'll write down some useful information for you to take on your mission. Sera chuckled as she saw the demoness write as if her life depended on it. But then, the Elder Dryad turned her attention to the small thornling who was idling by her leg. Little one, I need you to hold still for this next part, all right? The thornling bobbed up and down slightly as if in understanding. Its red eyes flaring up more. With that settled, Sera spoke her next words out loud. Initiate experience distribution please. Experience distribution initiated. Please select a target. Sera pointed to the first thornling. This one. In response, slender roots snaked their way towards the first thornling, gently wrapping around the small creature. Would you like to view the entity's statistics? Yes, please. Processing request. Displaying status. Name, Little 11. Species, Thornling. Level, 25. Magic, 10, rating, F. Magic resistance, 20, rating, F. Physical defense, 25, rating, F. Strength, 15, rating, F. Speed, 15, rating, F. Vitality, 15, rating, F. Overall challenge rating, F. Note, entity is 1 level away from reaching E tier. Sera's eyes widened in surprise as she absorbed the information displayed before her. She glanced down at the first thornling. How much experience does this little one need to level up? Calculating experience requirement. The thornling requires 400 experience to reach the next level. Turning her attention to the second thornling, Sera repeated the process. Now for you. The spirit tree responded in kind, roots extending towards the second thornling and gently encircling it. Processing request. Displaying status. Name, Little 12. Species, Thornling. Level, 24. Magic, 10, rating, F. Magic resistance, 20, rating, F. Physical defense, 25, rating, F. Strength, 15, rating, F. Speed, 15, rating, F. Vitality, 15, rating, F. Overall challenge rating, F. Note, entity is 2 levels away from reaching E tier. Sera took in the new information, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. And how much experience does this one need to level up? Calculating experience requirement. The thornling requires 800 experience to reach the next level. Sera's gaze shifted to the 2 thornlings before her. The 6,000 core experience she had accumulated could be used to strengthen the spirit tree, and by extension, dungeon itself. Yet, Sera's thoughts drifted to the thornlings. Leveling them up would not only reward their courage but also enhance their abilities, which would still be minor, but not completely insignificant. I'm also curious as to what they will become once they reach E tier. Nodding, her mind made up, Sera spoke with quiet resolve. Let's proceed with leveling up both of them. Initiate experience distribution, please. Experience distribution initiated. How much core experience do you wish to distribute? The current core experience to standard experience conversion rate is 1:1. Enough to level up each thornling to reach E rank respectively. This will cost 1,200 core experience, are you sure? Yes. The roots tightened ever so slightly around the 2 thornlings, their surfaces shimmering with slight glow light as the experience transferred over. The eyes on both creatures glowed even brighter, their body trembling slightly as they teetered on the brink of transformation. Experience distribution successful. Both entities have reached level 26. Initiating evolution sequence. The thornlings' bodies glowed with an intense, radiant light that enveloped their small forms entirely. The glow pulsed rhythmically, each wave of light causing the creatures to expand incrementally. Their diminutive frames stretched and grew, the vines thickening and the thorns sharpening to fine points. Eventually, the radiant glow faded, revealing the thornlings' new forms. They now stood at the height of Sera's knees, their vines more robust while the thorns gleamed with a sharper edge. Evolution sequence complete. Displaying status. Name, Little 11 and 2. Species, Greater Thornling. Level, 26. Magic, 12, rating, F. Magic resistance, 22, rating, F. Physical defense, 28, rating, F. Strength, 18, rating, F. Speed, 18, rating, F. Vitality, 18, rating, F. Overall challenge rating, D. Note, both entities possess identical statistics at this moment. Consequently, their attributes are presented collectively. The newly evolved thornlings moved around excitedly, their larger forms testing their new capabilities. They examined themselves with an almost childlike curiosity, red eyes gleaming with delight at their enhanced stature. Sera rubbed her temples thoughtfully. Perhaps you both deserve names now, to differentiate yourselves from the other thornlings. Zoha stopped writing in her journal for a moment and looked up suddenly. What about valor and brave? Sera's eyes widened slightly. That's not bad, she then turned her gaze to the newly evolved thornlings. What do you two think? The thornlings bobbed up and down enthusiastically in a clear expression of approval. Sera felt a sense of warmth wash over her upon seeing this. It was always nice to see her monsters grow and develop. Did you gain any new abilities, Valor? Sera asked the first thornling. Valor responded by taking a small step back. With a sudden motion, it unleashed a powerful lash from one of its many vines. The vine sliced through the air with a sharp, resounding crack, the sound echoing like a whip. Zoha clapped her hands, a delighted bounce in her step. Well done, Valor! The thornling bobbed happily, facing Zoha and flexing his newly grown vines. The sharp appendages moved with newfound confidence, displaying the creature's enhanced abilities. Sera turned to the second thornling, her curiosity piqued. And you, Brave? What can you do now? Brave stepped forward, its form radiating a subtle, yet distinct energy. It focused for a moment, and then one of its thorns began to glow with a faint green aura. With a swift, controlled motion, it extended the thorn and tapped a nearby stone, which immediately split into several smaller pieces with a clean cut. The ability to sharpen its thorns to such a degree would be highly useful in close combat. Sera nodded in approval. Enhanced cutting ability. Impressive, Brave. The two thornlings seemed to swell with pride, their red eyes glowing brighter. Sera couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. You've both done exceptionally well. Remember, with greater power comes greater responsibility. Use your strength wisely. Valor and Brave bobbed in unison, their agreement evident in their glowing eyes and poised stances. Sera chuckled softly at the sight but then turned her gaze toward Zoha, her expression becoming more serious. This might be sudden, Zoha, but have I registered your presence to the spirit tree before? No, you haven't, mistress. However, I'm ready if you wish to do it now. Much appreciated, just stay still. A series of thin black roots silently emerged from the ground, snaking their way up Zoha's body. The roots wrapped around her legs and arms, and the demoness didn't react in the slightest. Entity analysis initiated. Processing request. Displaying status. Name, Zoha. Species, Greater Swarm Demon. Level, 280. Magic, 280, rating, S. Magic Resistance, 200, rating, B. Physical Defense, 200, rating, B. Strength, 120, rating, D. Speed, 200, rating, B. Vitality, 120, rating, D. Overall Challenge rating, S. Chapter 22 Marred. The roots encircling the spirit tree's chamber unfurled to reveal the path ahead. As Sera, Zoha, and Valor stepped forward, the roots bowed slightly, acknowledging their passage. Ermo stood nearby, leaning heavily against a sturdy tree trunk. His eyes were closed, and his breaths were deep and steady as he somehow fell asleep while standing. Valor was the first to dart forward. The greater thornling rushed up to Ermo, its momentum carrying it forward with surprising speed. The sudden impact of Valor's enthusiastic greeting caused Ermo to jolt awake, a sharp yelp escaping his lips as the thornling collided with him. Shit! While Valor moved back excitedly, Ermo rubbed his arms, wincing slightly as he eased away from the tree trunk. His expression initially twisted in mild irritation, but it swiftly morphed into one of surprise as he fully absorbed the sight of Valor's transformed state. Whoa, what happened to you? Sera stepped gracefully beside the greater thornling. Valor is its name, and I must admit, he seems to have taken quite a liking to you. Ermo's lips curved into a tentative smile, his initial surprise giving way to a subtle warmth. However, as Valor bounded towards him once more, the beastkin raised a hand in a gentle gesture of restraint. Sorry, buddy, let's take it easy, yet. Valor's enthusiasm dimmed noticeably, the vibrant glow in its red eyes fading to a softer hue. The thornling's posture slumped slightly, and it moved back towards Sera with a subdued, almost dejected demeanor. Sera knelt down and gently rubbed the leaves on the greater thornling. You should go with Brave and return to the rest of your friends. The greater thornling shuffled around hesitantly, its movements noticeably slower and more subdued than before. The creature's vibrant red eyes flickered with an almost reluctant light as it took a final, lingering glance at Ermo. It then turned to join Brave, their forms melding into the shadows of the forest. Zoha's soft chuckle broke the quiet as she observed the interaction. What did you do to make them like you so much? Ermo scratched the back of his ear briefly, brushing through the thick fur with an almost absent-minded motion. Just fed em some fruits and nuts I found around here. They've kinda grown on me, to be honest. Regardless, I've mostly settled the things I needed to do here before heading out. How about you both? Sera said, eyeing the demoness and the beastkin. Boss, this might not be a good time, but can I ask you something? Sera observed him for a moment, her head tilting slightly to the side. That depends, but say what you want. I was wondering if you or Zoha could give me some proper clothes and equipment. Is that all you require? Yeah, just felt like I could use something better. Sera let out an amused snort as she glanced at Zoha. Do you have anything to give him? The demoness turned her gaze towards Ermo, eyes narrowing slightly as she sized him up. She circled him slowly, her keen eyes assessing his build and stature with meticulous care. After a moment, she shook her head, a slight frown tugging at the corners of her lips. No, mistress, I do not have any gear that fits his size. His build is too different from the humans I usually kill. Could you make something for him instead? I've noticed the threads you were using earlier. Zoha's eyes flickered with a reluctance. She sighed softly, the sound almost imperceptible. I can fashion something simple, mistress. She then turned to Ermo, her gaze sharp and expectant. What are your preferences? Ermo scratched his head, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. I'm not really sure. I'm fine with anything, really. Fine with anything? Do you have any idea how infuriating that is for someone creating custom gear? I just need something practical, I guess. Durable and comfortable. Zoha let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes. Fine. Durable and comfortable it is. Zoha took out a needle from within her cloak. Then, she closed her eyes for a brief moment as threads of various colors materialized around it like wisps of smoke. She then immediately weaved the threads with deft precision, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of either unparalleled talent, years of experience, or perhaps both. First, the demoness crafted a sturdy pair of trousers, the fabric thick and durable. Next came a tunic, designed for ease of movement, with reinforced stitching along the seams to prevent wear and tear. Zoha added several hidden pockets, their openings seamlessly integrated into the design. As she worked, Zoha's irritation was slowly replaced by a focused determination. She added a green-colored cloak as well as a pair of boots as the final touch to the whole ensemble. Soon, Zoha stepped back, examining her work with a critical eye before handing the ensemble to Ermo. There, she said, her voice carrying both hints of satisfaction and residual annoyance. Try it on. Ermo chuckled as he took the outfit from Zoha. Thanks, he said, slipping into the trousers and tunic with ease. The fabric felt surprisingly light yet incredibly sturdy against his skin. He moved around a bit, testing the flexibility of the boots and the fit of the cloak. This is perfect. Zoha acknowledged Ermo with a slight nod. Just don't ruin it too quickly. Sera shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. I need something from you as well. A mask, to avoid being recognized in Marwood again. Do you have anything suitable? Zoha frowned slightly. I only have one, she said, reaching into the depths of her cloak. After a moment, she pulled out a mask crafted to resemble a deer's face, intricately detailed with delicate antlers and lifelike features. Sera took the mask, examining it closely. Where did you get this? My brother gave it to me, Zoha said quietly, her fingers brushing against the mask's edge as she handed it over. He didn't need it anymore. Sera measured the mask against her own face, but quickly realized it was too large. She handed it back to Zoha, a thoughtful expression on her face. It's beautifully made, but it's too large for me. However, it did give me an idea. The Elder Dryad stepped back and spat a small seed onto the ground. The seed sank into the earth, and within moments, a slender green shoot emerged, growing rapidly. The plant twisted and turned, its leaves rustling softly as it shaped itself into a mask. The final product was a delicate yet sturdy deer mask, perfectly sized for Sera. She picked up the mask, examining its intricate details. The natural patterns and textures of the plant had seamlessly transformed into a beautiful and functional piece. She then broke off her antlers with a practiced motion before putting on the mask, adjusting it carefully until it sat comfortably on her face. What do you think? She asked, turning to face Ermo and Zoha. Looks good to me, boss. It should suffice as a disguise, mistress. Sera nodded, satisfied with their responses. We should leave for Marwood soon, but before that, I want to ask you a few questions, Zoha. The demoness inclined her head. Of course, mistress. What do you need to know? Sera tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing thoughtfully behind her mask. First, will people really not find my mask conspicuous? Zoha chuckled softly. Mistress, there are far stranger things in Marwood than a woman in a mask. Your mask will draw a few glances at most, but nothing more than that. And what about Ermo? Won't people question why he is following me around? They'll likely assume Ermo is a slave or a servant. It's not uncommon in Marwood, and no one will pay much mind to it. I see, that's good to hear. But is there anything specific you need me to do aside from watching over the dungeon, mistress? Zoha asked. Sera considered this for a moment, fingers lightly drumming against her thigh. Do you think there's a risk of strong adventurers venturing into the dungeon while we're gone? It's unlikely, mistress. Your dungeon is very new and likely hasn't yet been promoted by the Adventurers Guild. Does the Adventurers Guild keep records of all dungeons? Yes, mistress. They do keep detailed records. In that case, I would prefer it if you could erase or edit the records for our dungeons so that people won't know about it for the immediate future. But at the same time, I don't want the dungeon to be defenseless. I can always leave some of my flies in the dungeon to keep watch while I'm away. If there are any strong intruders, I can teleport back immediately. Excellent. Do you know where the records for the artificial dungeon cores are kept? Zoha nodded and smiled. Yes, mistress. I do know, and it shouldn't take long to cover up the existence of your dungeon. With that, Sera turned to Ermo, her expression inquisitive. Any last-minute concerns? Ermo shook his head, his expression determined. Nope, ready as always, he said, adjusting his new outfit with a grin. Sera gave him an approving nod. Good. Let's get ready to move out. We have a lot to do in Marwood. Sera and Ermo emerged from a swirling cloud of flies into the grimy alleyway. The transition was sudden and disorienting. One moment, they were surrounded by the buzzing chaos of Zoha's flies, and the next, they found themselves in the squalid confines of the narrow passage. The Elder Dryad adjusted her hooded cloak, pulling it tighter around her shoulders as she took in her surroundings. The alley was narrow and grimy, its walls marred with graffiti and old, peeling posters. Trash littered the ground, while a few stray cats prowled the area. This place reeks of human misery. Ermo adjusted his boots, nose wrinkling in disgust. Sounds about right, everything smells like piss. Sera turned to Zoha, who or what should we look for? The demoness reached into her cloak and handed a journal to Sera. I've prepared some directions in this journal, mistress. You'll need to find a broker to get into the underground arena. Sera took the journal and briefly read through the pages. Thank you, Zoha. And remember, your task is to erase the records of my dungeon from the guild's archives. I won't forget, mistress. With that, Zoha vanished into a cloud of flies, leaving Sera and Ermo alone in the alley. Once Zoha had disappeared, Ermo stepped beside Sera, ears twitching as he scanned the alley for any signs of danger. Anywhere we're going in particular? Sera pulled out the journal Zoha had given her and flipped through the pages again, scanning the detailed notes. It says here that we should look for a red gate, and barring that, we should try to catch the attention of one of Vito's men. Sera closed the journal and tucked it back into the folds of her shadowy cloak. Ermo, stay close and inform me if you see anything of note. Got it, boss. Sera and Ermo walked through the streets, the air thick with the scent of sweat, refuse, and desperation. Struggling humans and beastkin alike lined the grimy alleyways, their faces etched with hardship and fatigue. Sera's gaze flitted over the scene, her expression remaining completely neutral. Ermo, she began, her tone calm and detached, does seeing your fellow beastkin in such dire straits stir any particular emotions within you? Ermo's ears twitched as he glanced around. I feel for them, sure. But I can't help everyone, boss. I've got to pick my battles. And what of the humans? What are your sentiments towards them? I don't hate them, if that's what you're asking. But I don't like them much either, not after what they did to my people. It's hard to forget, you know. What if we were to eventually find ourselves in conflict with other beastkin? What are your thoughts on that? Ermo shrugged, his expression nonchalant. That might be a step too far for me, but it depends on the context. If it's for survival or if they pose a real threat, then I'd have to consider it. It's not ideal, but the world isn't exactly kind to us. Sera's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. Your views are rather pragmatic, Ermo. The world sucks. If I want to make it, I have to think a bit more bluntly. Idealism doesn't get you very far when you are constantly fighting to survive. Pragmatism is a valuable trait. It's good to know where you stand. As the two continued walking, Sera's keen senses pricked with awareness. She noticed a subtle rustling behind them, the faint sound barely perceptible. Sera glanced back once, eyes narrowing as she scanned the surroundings. Her gaze settled on a broken crate. To her surprise, a little beastkin girl with blue hair and fur was hiding behind it, with her eyes peeking out cautiously. Sera immediately stopped walking. Ermo, noticing her sudden pause, furrowed his brow. Why are we stopping, boss? Sera gestured subtly towards the crate. We're being followed, she murmured, nodding in the direction of the girl. Ermo squinted his eyes, and soon, his expression shifted from confusion to recognition as he focused on the young beastkin girl. Her blue hair and fur were unmistakable. Faye. The girl flinched at the sound of her name, darting her eyes between Sera and Ermo. But, seeing Ermo's familiar face, she slowly emerged from her hiding spot. Ermo turned to Sera with an earnest expression. Do you mind if I talk to her for a moment? That depends. Why is the girl so important to you? She was from the same village as me. I'm surprised to find her here. Hearing this, Sera nodded. Very well. You may speak with her, but do not take too long. Ermo approached Faye, his steps careful and deliberate. Sera followed behind, maintaining a respectful distance. The girl remained shy, but the sight of a familiar face gave her some courage. He crouched down to Faye's level, offering a reassuring smile. It's been a while, Faye. Are you okay? Faye's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, her small hands trembling. Uncle Ermo, I didn't know where else to go. I've been so scared. Ermo placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's all right. I'm here now. Can you tell me what happened? Faye sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. A lot of the people from the village were locked up. I was lucky to escape. Ermo's jaw tightened. Do you know where Auntie Alba is? Faye nodded slowly. Last time I saw her, she was being taken away by some men in red robes. Did those men have black eagle symbols on their clothes? I think so. Ermo took a deep breath, fists clenching tightly as he struggled to contain his anger. His knuckles turned white with the effort, veins standing out starkly against his skin. He turned to Sera, eyes filled with desperation and determination. Boss, there is a chance that my wife is in the underground arena. He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Ermo's heart pounded in his chest, the silence stretching painfully long before speaking again. Please, he finally continued, his voice breaking slightly. If you see her, save her. I beg of you. Sera nodded curtly. I promise you that I'll do my best if I find your wife. However, what do you plan on doing with the beastkin girl? Ermo glanced down at Faye, his eyes softening. Do you have anywhere to go, Faye? Faye shook her head, her small frame trembling again. And not really. I've just been getting by however I can. Suddenly, Faye's stomach grumbled loudly. Do you have any food? Ermo frowned. I'm sorry, don't have anything on me right now. Without a word, Sera stepped forward and spat a seed onto the ground. The seed quickly grew into a small bush, its branches heavy with ripe, glistening berries. Faye jumped back at the sight, her eyes wide with surprise. Ermo placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's all right. The berries are safe. Sera presented the bush to Faye, her face impassive. The girl hesitated, looking up at Ermo for reassurance. He nodded encouragingly. Go ahead, they're for you. Faye reached out tentatively, plucking a berry from the bush and popping it into her mouth. Her eyes lit up with delight as she tasted the sweet fruit. She quickly began to eat more, her hunger overtaking her caution. While Faye ate, Ermo turned to Sera, his expression one of surprise and gratitude. I'm surprised you would do such a thing for her. Sera shrugged, her tone pragmatic. I could tell that your mind would be burdened if she went hungry. Feeding the girl was a pragmatic choice on my end. Thanks, boss. It means a lot to me regardless. It's nothing, no need to think much of it, Sera replied, her voice cool and detached. Ermo patted Faye gently on the shoulder, his touch reassuring. Do you have any friends or someone to look after you, Faye? Faye nodded lightly, her eyes still shining with the excitement of the sweet berries. I know a few other kids. We stick together, but it's just us. Sera sighed softly. With an almost impatient motion, she lifted her mask slightly, revealing just enough of her face to spit a handful of seeds into her palm before handing the seeds over to Ermo. Give these to the girl. What are these for, boss? Ermo asked, glancing up at her. Sera's eyes flicked to Faye. She then returned her gaze to Ermo. If she feels threatened, she can throw them. They'll sprout quickly and provide some protection. Ermo nodded and turned to the beastkin girl, his voice softening. Keep these safe. If you ever feel in danger, throw them. They'll help protect you. Faye's wide eyes sparkled with gratitude as she reached out to take the seeds from Ermo. Her hands trembled slightly, the seeds rattling softly in her grasp. Thank you. She then looked up at Sera, her blue fur bristling with fear and admiration. And thank you, boss. I'll keep them safe. Sera gave a curt nod, turning her head away to hide the flicker of emotion that threatened to break through her composed facade. Let's get a move on, Ermo. Say your goodbyes quickly. Chapter 23, Rarity and Vanity. Ermo's eyes darted around as he walked, hands hovering near the hilt of his sword. Every rustle in the alleyways made his ears perk up. So, where is this broker exactly? Sera closed the journal Zoha had given her with a soft thud. Her gaze settled on a particularly run-down but bustling building made from a patchwork of weathered stone, mismatched bricks, and splintering wood, held together by what looked like sheer willpower and a few strategically placed metal braces. Wisps of colored smoke billowed from the windows, curling into the air in vibrant hues of green, purple, and blue. I think that's it, she said, pointing toward the building. Ermo turned his head and eyed the building, shoulders slumping slightly. Ah, one of those places. Sera tucked the journal securely in her cloak. She walked slowly toward the building, the pungent aroma growing stronger with each step. Shouldn't be too surprising, I doubt people here have much better to do. Ermo followed closely behind, his eyes still darting around warily. How are we gonna pay this broker, though? Not like we brought any gold coins. I've schemed through the journal Zoha gave me and figured out the values of various herbs. I can grow these in an instant and use them to bargain. Makes sense I guess, just be careful, boss. Sera placed her hands against the weathered wooden doors, feeling the rough texture under her palms. Please, I'll be fine. She swung the doors open, revealing the interior of the establishment. A dim, flickering light from a few colorful lanterns hanging haphazardly on the walls illuminated the room, casting shadows over the patrons. The room was filled with people lounging on mismatched, threadbare furniture, each piece sagging under the weight of countless bodies that had rested there before. Many patrons held long, ornate smoking pipes, the air was thick with the pungent aroma of smoked herbs, a blend of pungent scents that clung to everything. Overflowing ashtrays dotted many of the tables. The low murmur of conversation created a constant hum, punctuated occasionally by the sharp, raucous bursts of laughter. At the far end of the room, a bar stretched across the wall, cluttered with empty glasses and half-filled bottles. A burly bartender was wiping a glass with a dirty rag. His expression was one of bored disinterest, eyes glazed over as he performed the repetitive task. The glass in his hand was already clean, but he continued to polish it absently, his gaze occasionally drifting to the lively crowd. Sera's presence drew a few curious glances, but most patrons quickly returned to their own conversations and indulgences as she moved towards the bar. She approached with steady determination, her presence commanding respect even in this dimly lit, smoke-filled establishment. She leaned against the bar top, eyes locking onto the bartender's bored expression. Excuse me, I need some information. The bartender barely glanced at her, continuing to polish the already clean glass with his dirty rag. We don't serve information here. Especially not to anyone hiding behind a mask. Sera's eyes narrowed beneath the mask. She took a deep breath, weighing her options. The people here don't appear like the ones I saw before when I first arrived in the slums. It should be fine for me to remove my mask temporarily. She slowly removed her mask, revealing her striking features. Her silver eyes gleamed brightly, skin smooth and flawless, framed by flowing white hair. The bartender's jaw dropped slightly. He quickly regained his composure, tone shifting from disdain to a stunned reverence. I'm sorry, miss. What was it you needed to know? I'm looking for a broker to get into the underground arena, do you happen to know where I can find one? The bartender swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. Of course, of course. The broker you're looking for is here. She's usually playing cards at that table, he said, gesturing towards the center of the room with a shaky hand. A tan-skinned woman, covered in intricate tattoos, sat there, engrossed in a card game with a group of rowdy men. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, revealing the full extent of her tattooed arms and neck. Thank you, Sera said curtly, putting her mask back on as she turned away from the bar. Ermo, who had been standing nearby, stepped closer. Got what we needed. Sera nodded, her eyes fixed on the woman at the table. Let's go. They walked through the smoky haze and made their way toward the table. The low murmur of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter filled the air, but Sera's focus remained unbroken. As they approached, the rowdy group of men barely noticed them, too absorbed in their game and the tantalizing prospect of winning. The woman's confident demeanor and the stack of coins in front of her suggested she was winning big. She took a long draught from her smoking pipe, exhaling a cloud of smoke that swirled around her. Sera approached the table carefully with Ermo following closely behind. As they neared the table, one of the men lounging around it, a burly figure with a scruffy beard, leaned back and chuckled, then whistled at Sera, his eyes roaming over her with an unpleasant leer. Whoa, missy, why don't you take off that? Before he could finish speaking, Sera stepped on his sandal-covered foot with her bare heel. Ice crystals formed beneath her touch, spreading outwards like an intricate web. The chill penetrated deeply, freezing his foot from the inside out. The veins and capillaries crystallized while his flesh hardened with an audible crackle. His eyes widened in shock, pupils dilating as he tried to open his mouth to scream, but Sera's hand was already at his throat. She squeezed, and the icy chill spread from her fingertips. Frost crept along his skin, veins standing out in sharp relief as they turned a deathly blue. The freezing spread with ruthless efficiency, every muscle and tendon in his neck seizing up as the cold invaded his bloodstream. His scream was stifled, the sound dying in his throat as the icy grip took hold. The other men nearby stood up from their chairs, sending cards scattering to the ground. Hands shot to their weapons, knives, machetes, and other crude implements. Their eyes blazed with anger, faces contorted into expressions of barely restrained hostility. Sera's gaze flicked over each man with clinical detachment, the intensity of her scrutiny sharp enough to cut. Do you fools really want to do this? The men hesitated and looked at each other. The bravado that had fueled their aggression gradually wavered. Their weapons now trembled slightly in their grips as the weight of Sera's words sank in. Sera stood tall, her presence dominating the room. The icy chill that had emanated from her moments ago still hung in the air. The men lowered their weapons one by one, with some sheathing their blades altogether. Their shoulders sagged, and they took cautious steps back, as if fearing that any sudden motion might trigger Sera's wrath. Yet, one of them instead yelled and charged towards Sera. His battle cry echoed through the room, a desperate attempt to reclaim his lost pride. In response, she dragged her foot over the ground, creating a slick layer of ice. The man's feet lost traction the moment they touched the icy surface. His momentum, unchecked by friction, sent him skidding uncontrollably. He flailed his arms to try and regain his balance, but it was futile as he crashed face first into the hard floor with a bone-jarring thud. Sera placed her foot on the man's head, pressing down firmly. The ice responded instantly, its crystalline tendrils wrapping around his skull. His screams, initially loud and filled with terror, were abruptly silenced as the frost completely encased his head. She then looked up at the other men who were still standing around. Anyone else? The remaining men immediately turned and ran. Their hurried footsteps echoed as they scrambled over each other. Some performance that was, the tattooed woman from earlier said, smirking as she finished drawing from her smoke pipe. Sera turned to her. And you must be the broker, can you get myself and my companion into the underground arena? The woman leaned back. Depends on what you are willing to offer, she said, tapping ash from her pipe into an overflowing tray. But after that display, I might just be inclined to listen. Sera gestured to the man whose throat she froze earlier. Ermo, if you would be so kind. The beastkin raised an eyebrow at first, but quickly caught her message. Right. He then moved the body away, allowing Sera to take a seat. The broker eyed Sera carefully as she took another draft from her smoke pipe, exhaling a cloud of blue-tinted smoke. Normally I charge 1 silver coin per person, but just for you and your beastkin friend, I can do a silver for both. Sera sniffed the smoke, dissecting the scent of the herbs used. Viper shade and ether wisp. The broker chuckled. You know your stuff. Sera leaned forward. Are you interested in barter? How much do you have? I have enough. What you should really be asking is what can you do for me? The broker set down her pipe on the table and leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scrutinizing Sera. The Elder Dryad knew that she was being judged that very instant, but confidence was not something she lacked. Eventually, the broker sighed and went through her bag that she had set beside her. She pulled out 2 pieces of parchment edged with glowing red runes. Tickets to the VIP section of the underground arena, last of my stock. You don't mind if I verify these first, do you? Sera asked. Of course, she didn't have much of an idea on exactly what to do in order to verify the tickets. But I do know how to trigger the activation of runes. The broker shrugged. By all means, go ahead. Sera turned to Ermo, her eyes sharp and focused. I need you to make a cut on one of your fingers. Ermo frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Why? What are you planning, boss? She fixed him with a steely look. Stop asking questions and just do as I say. With a resigned sigh, Ermo nodded. He drew his sword, the metal glinting coldly in the dim light. He hesitated for a brief moment before making a small, precise cut on his finger. Blood welled up from the wound, a single crimson droplet forming. Sera quickly moved one of the pieces of parchment beneath the cut, her eyes fixed intently on the small wound. She watched as the blood dripped onto the parchment. The instant the drop of blood hit the runes, they glowed brightly, the red light pulsing with an almost hypnotic intensity. Satisfied, Sera repeated the process with the other piece of parchment, holding it under Ermo's bleeding finger. Once again, the runes glowed brightly as soon as the blood made contact. Sera glanced at the broker out of the corner of her eye, noting the slight lift of her eyebrow and the amused curl of her lips. The broker's raised eyebrow suggested surprise. Perhaps because I'm doing something right, or that I'm doing something they didn't expect. Sera's mind raced, considering several scenarios. If the broker was genuinely impressed, it could mean she overestimated Sera's knowledge and abilities, a useful leverage. Alternatively, the broker might be testing Sera, gauging her reactions to assess her true skill level. Despite not knowing the exact significance of the runes, Sera deduced that her actions had conveyed an air of competence and control. The broker's reaction confirmed this hypothesis. She doesn't seem to think that I don't know how the tickets function, and she's not overly excited or anxious either, which means there is a good chance that the tickets are legitimate. She handed both parchments back to the broker after a few moments. An amused smile played at the broker's lips as she tapped the parchment lightly against her palm. Now, how about your end? Standing up, Sera smoothed her cloak. Follow me, I'll take you to my stash. The broker's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing with skepticism. She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms over her chest. And how do I know you won't just lead me into a trap? I'm not one to take unnecessary risks. Turning slowly, Sera faced the broker with an intense gaze. If I wanted you dead, I could have killed you immediately. You have my word, no harm will come to you. The broker's eyes flicked over Sera's face. Her fingers tapped against her arm in a rhythmic pattern. Her brow furrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line as she weighed the risks. Finally, she sighed, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Her expression softened, though a hint of wariness remained in her eyes. All right, lead the way. Sera led both Ermo and the broker to a secluded spot in the slums, a narrow alleyway tucked between crumbling buildings. The area was dimly lit by a single flickering lantern hanging from a rusted hook. The ground was uneven, with a small patch of dirt breaking the monotony of the cobblestones. The broker glanced around, evidently looking both annoyed and skeptical. She crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. There's nothing here. Sera stepped forward, and spat out a small, shiny seed onto the patch of dirt at her feet. Not yet. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, and the broker's skepticism deepened. Then, the seed pulsated with a faint, bluish glow. Tiny tendrils emerged, delicate and shimmering, as if woven from light itself. The plant grew rapidly, as glowing leaves unfurled one by one. The leaves were a vivid blue, each one radiating a gentle light that bathed the surroundings in a serene glow. The ether wisp plant swayed slightly, its tendrils intertwining gracefully and filling the air with a faint, sweet fragrance. The broker took a step back, her eyes wide with astonishment. The soft blue glow reflected in her eyes, illuminating her stunned expression. Holy shit! Sera gestured to the ether wisp. You're free to take everything. After a moment, she stood up and turned to Sera. Who are you really? Does it really matter? I fulfilled my end of the bargain. Right, right. The broker approached the plant and knelt down, fingers brushing gently against the leaves. The soft, delicate texture seemed to intrigue her as she lingered, absorbing the plant's ethereal beauty. Just as the broker reached to collect the leaves, Sera coughed loudly, causing the broker to pause and look up. One more thing. Can you guide me to the underground arena? The broker straightened, a confident smirk playing on her lips. I'd love to, but it will cost you extra. Sera sighed deeply. With a sharp snap of her fingers, the ether wisp plant rapidly wilted. Each vibrant blue leaf faded to a dull, lifeless gray. The broker gasped in horror as she watched the life drain from the plant. She reached out desperately, clutching at the withering leaves as if she could somehow reverse the process. Her fingers trembled, the once soft and pliant texture of the leaves now brittle and fragile under her touch. What did you do? Sera shrugged nonchalantly. I've changed my mind about the payment, that's all. The broker's eyes darted from the dying plant to Sera. Beads of sweat formed on her brow, and her breaths came in shallow, hurried gasps. I was just joking earlier, she stammered. I'll guide you to the underground arena, no extra charge. Sera snapped her fingers again, and the plant partially revived, its leaves regaining some of their original vitality, but not all. I know the value of ether wisp, you should be grateful to even get a few leaves that are this fresh. The broker nodded hastily as she collected the remaining leaves and placed them into a leather pouch. She took great care during the entire process, as if she were holding gold in her hands. Chapter 24, The Underground. The broker led Sera and Ermo through a series of nondescript locations, past a row of dilapidated shacks where children played in the dirt, through a bustling market where the cries of vendors hawking their wares mixed with the clatter of pots and pans, and along a shadowy lane where the only light came from flickering lanterns hung sporadically from hooks above. Finally, they emerged in front of a small unassuming stall tucked away at the end of a secluded alley. The storefront was modest, its wooden sign just barely hanging above the door, the paint faded and peeling. An old man stood behind a counter just inside the open doorway. His face was lined with age, and his hands moved with a surprising deftness as he arranged small trinkets on the display table. The broker stopped and turned to Sera and Ermo. This is the place. Ermo looked around the narrow alley and the worn facade of the shop. Are you sure? Sera took out the journal and flipped through it briefly, skimming the pages before closing it then tucking it back in her cloak. We should be in the right place. The broker pointed to the old man. Just hand him your passes and he'll take care of the rest. Sera nodded, eyes locking onto the broker with an unwavering intensity. Thank you. We'll take it from here. The broker's lips parted as if she was about to protest or add something. But a stern glare from Sera silenced her. The broker's shoulders sagged slightly, and she ducked her head, stepping back and melting into the shadows of the alley. Afterwards, Sera walked to the stall and slipped her hand into her cloak to take out the 2 VIP tickets. She slid them across the worn counter, the sound barely a whisper against the aged wood. The old man working the stall squinted as he leaned closer to inspect the passes. His hands, surprisingly agile despite his age, moved with practiced precision as he retrieved a magnifying glass whose handle was covered in swirling runes from beneath the counter. As he lifted the magnifying glass to his eye, the runes on the handle flared brightly. The glowing symbols interacted with the runes that were embedded in the VIP tickets, causing the passes to respond in kind. The inscriptions on the tickets lit up with a vibrant energy, confirming their authenticity. Satisfied with what he saw, the old man lowered the magnifying glass, the glow fading gradually as he set it back on the counter. The light from the runes dimmed, leaving behind a lingering sense of arcane power. He slid the tickets back to Sera with a deliberate slowness, watching her carefully. You new around here? He asked with a gravelly voice. Sera shot a deadpan look at him. None of your business. The old man chuckled as his weathered fingers moved beneath the counter, and a clicking sound resonated through the room as he pressed a hidden lever. Doors open, have fun. Part of a nearby building's facade slid open with a grind of stone against stone, revealing a hidden entrance. Sera and Ermo approached it and saw a surprisingly well-maintained staircase leading down. Each step was lit up by several lanterns hanging from the walls. Sera and Ermo descended down the newly opened passage. Flickering lantern light cast shifting shadows, playing across the rough masonry of the stone walls. Sera's keen eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in every detail with meticulous precision. She noted the irregularities in the stonework, the patches of moss clinging to the damp surfaces, and the occasional rusted sconce that held the flickering lanterns. Beside her, Ermo's ears strained to catch any sound beyond their own footsteps, alert to any potential threat. As they moved deeper into the underground space, the stone walls gradually disappeared and gave way to smooth, cold metal. The transition was subtle at first, a few patches of exposed metal here and there, but soon, the entire corridor was lined with it. The metal walls were covered in patches of rust, their surfaces marred by years of exposure. Ermo reached out a hand and brushed against the cold metal. He grimaced slightly at the sensation, the chill seeping into his skin. This whole place is covered in this stuff. Do you think the entire underground is made like this? Sera grimaced slightly upon seeing the metallic surroundings, her distaste evident. It would appear that's precisely the case. Quite troublesome, really. Will it be harder for you to use your powers here, boss? It won't make things easier for me, that's for certain. But don't worry, I'll manage. Eventually, they reached the end of the corridor and stepped into an unexpectedly opulent space. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling while velvet drapes adorned the walls, their deep, luxurious colors creating a stark contrast with the cold metal of the corridor they had just left behind. Plush carpets muffled their footsteps, adding an air of sophistication to the space. Yet, despite the luxurious surroundings, many of the patrons were a stark contrast. The room was filled with shady-looking individuals, many covered in tattoos and sporting various scars. Still, the waitstaff were all well-dressed at the very least. Each server was impeccably dressed in tailored suits or elegant dresses, adding a touch of class to the otherwise rough crowd. A beastkin waitress approached Sera, her tray balanced effortlessly on one hand. She wore an elegant dress that accentuated her movements. Welcome, first drinks are on the house. Sera declined with a small shake of her head. Ermo, however, accepted a glass and nodded his thanks. Afterwards, the waitress moved away gracefully, her footsteps barely making a sound on the plush carpet. While Ermo was enjoying his drink, Sera looked around the area. Her gaze moved from the luxurious decor to the patrons as she tried to make sense of things. This place is much larger than I imagined. It's more like an underground complex, and I'm not even in the arena yet. Anyone stand out to you? She asked out loud. Ermo took a sip of the wine, the rich liquid swirling in the glass before he set it down on a nearby table. Not really, maybe we could spot him in the arena during a match. Agreed, that sounds like a sound idea, Sera said. She walked up to another waiter, a young man with a neat haircut and a polished demeanor. Excuse me, can you tell me where the arena is located? The waiter nodded respectfully. Of course, madam. Please, follow me. Sera and Ermo followed the waiter through a large corridor, its high ceiling amplifying the distant echoes of the bustling arena beyond. As they approached a set of heavy double doors, the sound of the crowd grew louder, a cacophony of shouts and cheers seeping through the cracks. The waiter opened the door and revealed the arena. It was a vast, circular space, its metal walls gleaming dully under the harsh light of many overhead lanterns. The arena grounds were made of rich, dark soil, packed firmly underfoot and giving off a thick, earthy scent. The floor was packed with rowdy spectators. Some leaned precariously against each other, already visibly inebriated thanks to the many waiters and waitresses weaving through the crowd with trays of frothy beer. The tangy scent of alcohol mingled with the pungent aroma of sweat, creating a heady atmosphere. In stark contrast, the VIP area was elevated above the general seating, enclosed by a low railing draped with rich, velvet curtains in deep burgundy. Plush, cushioned seats lined the area, each one upholstered in luxurious fabric and spaced comfortably apart to allow for easy movement. The air here was cleaner, the noise slightly muffled by the distance and the heavy curtains, providing a more refined and exclusive viewing experience. The waiter led them through the throngs of people until they reached an old lady manning a small stall just outside the VIP section. Her weathered face was etched with lines of experience, and her keen eyes sparkled with a shrewd intelligence. The stall was adorned with various trinkets and parchments, each one meticulously arranged. The waiter exchanged a few quiet words with her, and soon, the old lady nodded. She reached for 2 pieces of parchment from a neatly stacked pile. Each parchment was meticulously numbered with seat assignment in thick dark ink. "Your seat numbers, please enjoy the show," the waiter said. Sera took her parchment, glancing at the number before meeting the waiter's gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm and measured. Ermo nodded as he accepted his parchment, then turned to Sera. "Are we actually gonna watch the match, boss?" She moved over to her seat, maneuvering past a few other spectators who barely glanced up from their conversations. She settled into the plush cushioning, senses still on high alert. "Nothing much to lose since we're already here. Just keep yourself on alert." Ermo sat down next to Sera, looking towards the arena below. "You really think this fight's gonna be interesting?" Sera shrugged, her gaze fixed on the center of the arena. "We'll have to see." An announcer's voice boomed across the arena, amplified by various magical crystals propped up around the arena's walls. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the meat grinder. For those new to tonight's special event, allow me to explain. The meat grinder is a test of survival, pitting our brave contestants against the fiercest of beasts. Will they succeed or become free meals for the beasts? Let's find out." 2 armed men shoved a beastkin man into the arena from one of the gates. He stumbled forward, fear etched across his face as he tried to regain his balance while the crowd jeered and laughed. From the opposite gate, a monstrous beast was wheeled in a massive cage. It was a hulking creature covered in matted fur and scars. Its eyes glowed with a menacing red light, and its fangs were bared in a snarl. Ermo leaned closer to Sera, his voice tense. "I don't like where this is going." Sera's gaze remained fixed on the arena. "You're welcome to leave if you're uncomfortable. I'm still curious." The announcer continued to rile up the crowd, his voice echoing loudly. "Are you all ready?" The crowd responded with a resounding yes. The beastkin man in the middle of the arena was visibly terrified. He tried to run back to the gates behind him, but they had already been shut tight. His desperation only drew more laughter from the crowd. Ermo clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. "I can't watch this." Sera's eyes flicked to the people around them, their curious and suspicious glances landing on Ermo. "Calm down, we're being watched," she murmured. Ermo took a deep breath, his muscles visibly relaxing as he returned to his seat. "Boss, it's probably best if I head out before I do something really stupid." Sera let out an exasperated sigh, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Fine, what do you intend to do?" "I'll go snooping around the other areas of the underground," Ermo replied, his voice low but determined. "See what I can dig up and report back when I can." "Don't bother reporting back to me," Sera said, her tone firm. "It's unlikely we'll be able to find each other in this maze. Instead, wait for me back at the entrance in the slums once you're finished." Ermo nodded, understanding the practicality of her instructions. "Got it. I'll be off now." As he stood to leave, Sera reached out and touched his arm. "Do you want to take some of my seeds with you for protection?" Ermo shook his head and let out a small smile. "I'll be fine, boss." "Thanks, though." He gave her a respectful nod before slipping away. Sera watched the beastkin slinking away and disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Then, she turned her attention back to the crowd, scanning the faces in the VIP section, hoping to spot Vega. Her eyes swept over the sea of spectators, but she saw no sign of him. In the meantime, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, reverberating through the massive stone structure. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for the ultimate test of survival. The countdown begins now." A massive timer made of magical energy materialized above the arena, casting a bright glow over the spectators. The numbers ticked down from 10, each digit pulsing slightly as the countdown started. When the countdown reached its final moments, the arena fell into an almost eerie silence. The heavy iron bars of the beast's cage lifted, the mechanisms groaning and creaking ominously. The beastkin man stood in the center of the arena, eyes wide with terror. His gaze darted frantically, searching for an escape route while his breaths coming in short gasps. 3, 2, 1. The announcer's voice rang out. Then, with a thunderous crash, the cage door slammed open, and the monstrous beast bursted out of it with a primal roar. The beastkin man bolted across the arena, trying to run away as fast as he could. The beast, however, was even faster. Its powerful limbs propelled it forward with terrifying speed, each step shaking the ground. Before long, the creature pounced and used its massive jaws to clamp down on the man's leg. The sickening crunch of bone and the man's blood-curdling scream filled the air. The beast shook its head violently, lifting the man off the ground and thrashing him like a rag doll. Blood sprayed from the wound, the crimson droplets scattering like mist. The crowd erupted into a frenzy, their cheers and screams merging into a chaotic roar. Some watched in horror, unable to look away, while others reveled in the brutal spectacle. Despite this, Sera watched on with a neutral expression. If I could be the one in charge of these type of events in the future, it could be a decent way of acquiring talented enough sacrifices for the spirit tree. As the beast continued its savage attack, Sera's eyes flicked to the opposite end of the arena. There, she finally spotted a group of men entering. One man in the center was flanked by 4 members of the Black Eagles. Unlike the rest, who wore red hooded cloaks, this man wore a black hooded cloak and had purple tattoos snaking across his exposed skin. Based on the description in Zoha's journal, this man should be the one called Vega. Sera watched intently as Vega spoke with some members of the crowd. His entourage distributed potions and packets of herbs, the exchanges quick and discreet. The sight of the potions reminded her of the Black Eagle's notorious reputation for dealing in such substances. Determined to confront him, Sera began to slowly make her way through the crowd. She moved with deliberate caution, careful not to draw attention to herself. She edged closer, weaving through clusters of spectators who were too engrossed in the spectacle to notice her. But before she could get close, Vega and his entourage had already begun to move. They slipped through a side exit, disappearing from view. Sera cursed under her breath, frustration gnawing at her. She couldn't afford to lose him now. Chapter 25, Peas in a Pod. Abila, capital of Lizaria. Zoha placed several silver coins on the shop counter. Each coin landed with a satisfying clink, their sheen catching the shopkeeper's eye. The shopkeeper was an old woman with a warm smile. She leaned forward, her silver spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose. Her wrinkled hands moved with a practiced ease as she carefully counted the coins. Once satisfied with the amount, she reached beneath the counter and retrieved a small vial of magical white ink. Next, she took out a pristine feather quill. Last but not least, she placed a bottle of regular black ink on the counter, its rich color contrasting with the ethereal white ink. "Thank you for your purchase, dear. Are you planning on writing a book?" the shopkeeper asked. Zoha chuckled softly. "Something of the sort," she lied, her tone light and nonchalant. "Just a little project I've been working on." The shopkeeper nodded. "Well, I wish you the best of luck with your writing. There's nothing quite like putting pen to paper and bringing your thoughts to life. Thank you for the supplies. They're exactly what I needed." With a final nod of gratitude, Zoha carefully gathered the items from the counter. She placed the vials of ink and the quill into a small, leather pouch at her side. Then, Zoha straightened up, adjusting her cloak. "Have a good day," she said, offering a polite nod to the shopkeeper. "You as well, dear. Come back anytime." Zoha stepped out of the shop and took a deep breath, savoring the brief moment of calm. The air outside was crisp and cool, carrying the mixed scents of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. She allowed herself a moment to take it all in, if only just for a moment. "After this, all I need to do is head to the Adventurers Guild to alter the dungeon records." But her peace was short-lived. A familiar, hostile presence prickled at her senses, causing her to tense. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her heartbeat quickened. She turned her head to the right, and saw a figure waving at her. It was her brother, his expression surprisingly cheerful. "Fuck me, what's he up to this time?" "Hello there," he called out. Zoha's jaw tightened, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't dignify him with a response, instead focusing on the ground in front of her as she quickened her pace to move away. But her brother was persistent. She could feel his presence closing in, the intensity of his gaze burning into her back. Just as she thought she might escape, he moved swiftly and stepped in front of her to block her path. His face turned more serious, the cheerful facade slipping away to reveal a harder edge. "Hey, we need to talk, no tricks." Zoha rolled her eyes, a deep, annoyed sigh escaping her lips. "Listen, I have somewhere to be," she snapped, shoving him aside with surprising strength. Her fingers pressed into his chest as she pushed him away. But when she walked away, Dante's voice rang out again. "Zoha, we really do need to talk. Zoha halted abruptly, her shoulders tensing. She exhaled a long, weary breath before turning slowly, eyes narrowed in frustration. All right, what's wrong? Dante's jovial facade melted away in an instant, replaced by a look of genuine concern. Mom's sickness has gotten worse, she wants to see both of us. Zoha froze, her breath catching in her throat as if an invisible hand had wrapped around her neck. How bad is it? It's best if you see for yourself, she's still staying in the shop house as always. And why didn't you tell me sooner? Calm down, I only found out about Mom's worsening condition recently. You should know by now that I don't mess around when it comes to her. Zoha exhaled deeply, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. All right, let's go see her. Dante and Zoha walked side by side, their footsteps echoing softly on the cobblestone streets. The weight of their mother's condition pressing heavily on her heart. Beside her, Dante remained quiet, uncharacteristically so. As they approached the edge of the capital, they finally stopped in front of a quaint two-story shop house. The first floor housed a florist's shop, its windows covered with flower boxes overflowing with vibrant blooms. The sweet fragrance of roses, daisies, and lavender filled the air, offering a momentary respite from their heavy thoughts. A hand-painted sign above the door swayed gently in the breeze, the words Frida's Florals elegantly scripted in flowing letters. When the two siblings stepped into the shop, the tinkle of a bell announced their arrival. A human girl with brown hair, cheeks flushed with worry, rushed towards them. Mr. Dante, Ms. Zoha. You're here. Dante's eyes immediately sought hers. How is Madame Frida? Is she all right? The girl's expression was a mix of relief and concern. Her coughing has eased a bit, but her vision hasn't returned. Zoha's heart sank, the gravity of the situation pressing down on her. She exchanged a quick glance with Dante before following him. They reached a narrow staircase at the back of the shop, leading up to the living quarters. The second floor was a modest, cozy living space. Soft light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the worn wooden floor. The room was filled with comforting clutter, knitted blankets draped over furniture, various balls of colored yarn scattered everywhere. Frida was resting on a well-worn, but comfortable-looking bed in the center of the room. Her eyes, though open, stared blankly ahead, their once bright sparkle now clouded. The rise and fall of her chest was shallow as the occasional weak cough escaped her lips. Zoha approached the bed and knelt beside her mother, taking her hand gently. Mom, it's me. Frida turned her head slightly and smiled. Zoha, I knew you'd come. Dante coughed a bit into his hand and half-jokingly announced, and I'm here too, Mom. Frida chuckled weakly. Of course, I'd never forget my special boy. Dante knelt at the bedside beside Zoha. He reached out and gently took his mother's frail hand, guiding it to his cheek. The touch was light but it carried a weight of memories that words could never fully convey. Zoha mirrored his actions, holding her mother's other hand against her own cheek. Why are you two so quiet now? Frida asked with a weak chuckle. Zoha forced a smile. Well, if Dante weren't here, I'd probably be arguing with you about something silly, like why you insist on knitting those mismatched socks. I knit them mismatched so you two always have to come home to find the pairs. And here I thought it was just your unique fashion sense. Dante joked. Just as the mood started to lift, Frida's body was racked with a violent cough. Blood speckled her lips, and Zoha's heart skipped a beat. Without hesitation, Dante grabbed a napkin from the bedside table, his hand steady despite the worry etched across his face. Zoha moved to support Frida, cradling her mother's frail frame as the fit subsided. Frida's breathing was ragged as she looked at her children. Thank you, both of you, I'm so lucky to have you. Zoha tried to stay strong, holding her mother's hand firmly but gently. No, we're lucky to have you, Mom. Dante, sensing the need to lift the somber mood, smiled and began to speak. Hey, remember the day you found us in the forest? Frida's eyes sparkled faintly with the memory. Why don't you tell the story to me again? For old time's sake. Dante leaned back slightly, his gaze turning inward as he recalled the memory. It was a dark, foggy evening. I remember feeling completely lost. Zoha and I had no idea where we were or how we got there. We were huddled together under a tree, hoping someone would find us. Frida's smile grew as she listened. I was walking back from gathering herbs when I heard a faint cry. I followed the sound, and there you both were, shivering and covered in dirt. Dante chuckled softly. You looked so surprised, like you couldn't believe what you were seeing. But then you knelt down and wrapped us in your shawl. That warmth, it felt like the first time we were truly safe. Zoha squeezed her mother's hand. You didn't hesitate for a second, Mom. You just took us in. How could I leave you there? You were both so precious. And then you took us home, cleaned us up, and gave us the best meal we ever had. I remember the stew you made, it was like magic in a bowl. Frida laughed weakly. It was just simple vegetable stew, but you both ate it like it was a feast fit for kings. Zoha nodded with a bittersweet smile. You gave us everything we needed, and so much more. No need to think much of it, I just did what I thought was right. Frida said. For a moment, the room was silent. Nobody said a word. But eventually, Frida lightly traced the bandages wrapped around Zoha's hands. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, fragile yet filled with motherly concern. Zoha, dear, why do you still hide your skin condition? You know it doesn't change how much we love you. Zoha's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by the question. She glanced at Dante, who met her gaze with a reassuring nod. Mom, it's complicated, but I promise, it's not something you need to worry about. Frida's eyes filled with a mix of sadness and acceptance. I just want you to be happy, Zoha. Both of you. We know, Mom, Dante said softly. We know. Zoha leaned in and kissed her mother's forehead gently. We'll take care of each other. Don't worry about us. Frida smiled, her eyes closing as she relaxed back into her pillows. You always were a strong pair. Thank you for being here. Zoha and Dante sat on a weathered bench in a nearby park, the evening shadows lengthening around them. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. They remained silent, each lost in their thoughts, sitting as far apart as the bench allowed. Dante eventually broke the silence, leaning forward and picking up a small rock. He tossed it into the pond before them, watching as it created ripples on the still surface. Do you want to talk? Or are we just going to watch this pond forever? Zoha turned away from Dante, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. Can we really keep lying to Mom forever? Dante picked up another rock, the cool, smooth surface pressing into his palm. He tossed it into the pond, watching it skip once before sinking. Why are you asking this all of a sudden? Beads of tears began to form in the corners of Zoha's eyes. She wiped them away with a trembling hand before speaking again, her voice strained. Just, answer me. Dante grabbed another rock, juggling it in his hand for a few seconds as he contemplated his response. We've been lying to Mom for over a decade about our true nature. I don't see what difference it would make if we keep lying for a few more years. You sure? If you want to break the news to her so badly, go ahead. I mean, do you think she'll hate us if she knew that we actually eat people? Zoha asked. Dante shrugged. I'm going to be blunt with you, I have no fucking clue, and I'm not sure I want to know. Listen, I'm being serious here. And I gave you a serious answer. But before you say anything more, ask yourself if you really want to know what will happen if Mom knows the truth about us. You know what? Fair enough. Zoha turned her head towards Dante, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. Do you think Mom will have much time left? Dante's hand stilled, the rock slipping from his fingers and falling to the ground with a soft thud. I think she'll be fine, at least for another week or two. Maybe after that. Zoha turned her head back towards the pond, shoulders slumping. I don't understand how you can be so nonchalant. Dante fell silent, his eyes drifting to a small flower growing at the edge of the bench. He reached down and plucked it, its delicate petals trembling slightly in his grasp. As he methodically plucked away the petals, he spoke. I know you think I don't care about Mom, or you, or about going home. Zoha chuckled softly. You said it, not me. Dante's lips quirked into a brief, rueful smile. Maybe you could convince your mistress to heal Mom. Zoha fidgeted, her fingers twisting the hem of her cloak. I'll try. Dante stood up, brushing the dust off his hands. I'll try my best too, for whatever that's worth to you. He turned to leave, but before Dante could go far, Zoha's voice rang out, stopping him in his tracks. Do you really still want to go home, our real home? He turned back to face her. I'm comfortable living the life I have now. Performing, basking in the adoration of the masses, and, yes, eating some of my adoring fans. But I've never stopped trying to find a way for us to go home. Zoha frowned. Sorry, but it's hard for me to believe that. Dante shook his head slowly, reaching into his coat. He pulled out an ornate tarot card and handed it to Zoha. The card was intricately designed, its edges gilded with gold. At the center, a vibrant depiction of a jester in motley attire stood poised on the edge of a cliff, a small dog at his heels. Above him, the number 0 was inscribed, marking it as the Fool. If nothing else, take this from me. I appreciate the gesture, but I'll be fine. Dante's eyes darkened with concern. Zoha, please, I've heard rumors that the Inquisition has started moving around more lately. With this card, you won't have to ask me for help if things go south. Zoha paused as she considered his words. She looked at the card again, the image of the Fool seemingly beckoning her to take a leap of faith. The thought of relying on Dante still unsettled her, but the practicality of having a backup plan was undeniable. After a long moment, she finally reached out and took the card from Dante's hand. Thanks. Dante's expression softened, relief washing over his features. Just keep it close, and don't let anyone else have it. Chapter 26 Unlucky. Ermo wasn't quite sure how he had ended up chained to a chair. The cold metal bit into his wrists and ankles, the rough edges of the chains leaving angry red marks on his skin. His every nerve felt heavy, a leaden weight that made even the smallest movement a monumental effort. His muscles ached with a dull, persistent throb, and he struggled to even lift his head. The last thing he remembered was wandering through the other areas surrounding the underground arena. He stopped by at a bar that promised free drinks before feeling a sudden, sharp sting on his neck, then another on his arm. His vision quickly blurred, and he couldn't remember much after that. Suddenly, the creak of a door broke the silence as a Black Eagle member stepped in, his head bowed respectfully. Behind him, another figure followed, seated in a wheelchair. He was an aged man that still exuded a dignified authority that commanded attention. His well-tailored brown suit accentuated the silver threads in his graying hair and the meticulous trim of his beard. The old man coughed slightly as he wheeled himself inside. Thank you, you may leave now. The Black Eagle member hesitated, his eyes darting to Ermo and then back to the man in the wheelchair. Are you sure, boss? I'll be fine, the man replied with a slight wave. Leave us. With a reluctant nod, the member bowed once more and exited the room, the door closing softly behind him. The man in the wheelchair rolled himself closer to a nearby table, cluttered with an array of medical instruments and syringes that were meticulously arranged. He reached out with a steady hand, selecting a syringe. The cool metal glinted under the dim lighting as he examined it briefly, scrutinizing every detail. He turned his attention to Ermo while holding the syringe. This will hurt, but I need you to bear with me. Ermo's senses jolted awake as the man approached him, the syringe glinting ominously in the dim light. He felt a sharp pain as the needle pierced his skin, and the sensation of blood being drawn made his heart race. Despite all this, the man in the wheelchair remained steady, his expression one of practiced indifference. After filling the syringe with Ermo's blood, the man wheeled himself backward and set the blood-filled syringe on the table. He then turned his gaze to Ermo, studying him intently. Do you know where you are? Ermo blinked a few times, his vision slowly clearing as he took in his surroundings. The room was a stark, metallic chamber lined with instruments of torture and various medical devices. Chains and shackles hung from the ceiling while various tables were cluttered with scalpels, syringes and other tools that were stained with dark, dried smears. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the gravity of his situation. Where am I? The man in the wheelchair wheeled himself over to a nearby table cluttered with various objects and tools. You are in my personal workshop, he said with an almost casual tone. He paused for a moment, turning to face Ermo. Forgive me, where are my manners? I should introduce myself. I am Vittorio, the current head of the Black Eagles. Ermo struggled against his bonds, the metal biting into his skin. Let me go, you sick fuck. Vittorio shook his head slowly. I'm afraid I can't do that. He wheeled himself back to the table, picking up the blood-filled syringe. With a meticulous hand, he began to mix the blood with other substances, creating a dark, swirling mixture. Tell me, Beastkin, are you aware of the truth of the world? Piss off, Ermo spat. Unfazed, Vittorio continued. You see, over the many years I've been alive, I've learned a great deal. Some of these truths are things I would rather not remember. Ermo glared at him. Why are you even talking to me? Vittorio glanced up from his work, his eyes meeting Ermo's. I simply need a way to pass the time while I work, he said with a shrug. And it's not as though anyone will be coming to save you anytime soon. Maybe you're right about nobody saving me, Ermo said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But you're still gonna die. And what do you mean by that? You think you're safe, hidden away in your little workshop, but there's someone out there who's coming for your head, and you won't stand a chance. Vittorio laughed heartily. Oh, my beastkin friend, I do admire your confidence. He resumed his work on the mixture, hands moving with practiced ease. But I'm afraid I'm still not worried. Ermo's eyes darted around the room, taking in the array of strange instruments and devices. What are you even doing? Vittorio paused for a moment, then continued working on his mixture. I suppose there's no harm in talking to a soon-to-be dead man. He poured the mixture into a beaker and stirred it, the liquid swirling and changing color. I've always been fond of reading about the myths of old. A time when gods ruled the world, their power unmatched and their will absolute. He continued working on the mixture, moving with the practiced precision of a seasoned alchemist. Vittorio carefully poured the viscous liquid into a gleaming distiller. The glass and metal apparatus hissed softly as he adjusted the settings, the fluid beginning to bubble and transform. The unwashed masses still believe gods to be unparalleled and powerful beings. But I believe that the gods of old were more mortal than they'd like to admit. Ermo's curiosity finally got the better of him. His eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward. What do you mean by that? Vittorio's hands moved deftly as he combined other fluids with the mixture, the liquids merging and reacting with a faint hiss. He watched intently as the concoction changed color once again. Satisfied, he carefully transferred the mixture into a small, ornate vial, shaking it gently. It's well known in academic circles that gods have been dead in this world for a long time. Scholars have debated for how long exactly, but their deaths are a given truth. Ermo shook his head. I don't believe you. Vittorio shrugged, setting the vial aside and turning to face Ermo. It doesn't matter what you believe, my beastkin friend. Reality won't change to suit your beliefs. He picked up the vial again, examining it closely. According to legend, when the beastkin were created, some among them were tied more closely to the divine than others. These chosen beastkin would then become the first shifters. Ermo's eyes narrowed as he listened. What's the point of all this? Vittorio carefully poured the mixture into another syringe. He tapped the syringe lightly, testing it with a practiced flick of his wrist. As you can see, my best days have long passed me. So, what's the harm in trying to take one step closer towards divinity? Vittorio rested the syringe on his lap and turned to face Ermo. His expression grew more intense, his eyes boring into Ermo's with a hint of malice. Do you know your wife is actually here, in the underground? Ermo's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened, and he surged forward. Take me to her, now. Vittorio couldn't help but laugh. A barking dog is nothing to be afraid of. I still have the reports from when my men worked with the military to raid your village. It was quite the spectacle. While it was impressive that you turned out to be a shifter, your inability to control yourself while transformed makes you nothing more than a beast that needs a leash. Ermo's face twisted in rage, his fists clenched at his sides. You bastard! Vittorio shrugged. That makes two of us. With a deep breath, Vittorio brought the syringe to his arm, the needle hovering over a prominent vein. He hesitated, the tip of the needle barely pressing against his skin, as if savoring the moment. Then, with a determined press, he plunged the needle in and injected the mixture into his bloodstream. Almost immediately, Vittorio convulsed, muscles seizing as the magical concoction spread through his veins. His face contorted with pain as his veins glowed with a pulsating light, coursing through his body like molten metal. The syringe clattered to the floor as Vittorio's hands clenched into fists. His breathing became ragged, each gasp echoing through the room, a harsh counterpoint to the silence that followed. The old man's skin seemed to stretch and shifted, the glow beneath it pulsating rhythmically. Vittorio's convulsions gradually subsided, his breathing steadied, though it remained shallow and labored. Yet, the glowing veins remained as he stabilized, his movements stiff at first but growing more fluid with each passing moment. As he stood, Vittorio's once frail form now exuded an almost palpable energy. His transformation left him visibly changed, the previously brittle exterior replaced by a hardened, more formidable presence. His eyes, now glowing with an otherworldly light, turned to Ermo, filled with triumph. Ermo's heart pounded in his chest. What have you done? Vittorio smiled, a chilling, almost inhuman grin. I have taken the first step towards ascension. Ermo scoffed, his eyes narrowing with disdain. You're delusional. I know only one person who might actually be close to being a god, and it's definitely not you. Vittorio's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. He swung his fist which connected with Ermo's face with a sickening thud. The force of the blow sent Ermo and the chair he was bound to crashing to the floor. The cold, hard surface met him with brutal impact, pain radiating through his body. Vittorio flexed his arm, muscles bulging with newfound strength. I've always known that beastkin shifters were the key to unmatched power. And now, I have it all to myself. Ermo glared up at him, defiance burning in his gaze. He tried to summon his own powers, his fur briefly blazing with energy, but it flickered and died out almost immediately. Why can't I transform? Don't bother, Vittorio said. I took precautions to ensure you can't transform. You're powerless. Vittorio walked up to Ermo, towering over the beastkin. While it's been fun, your corpse will do just fine for my purposes now. But before he could come any closer, Vittorio suddenly seized up and convulsed violently. His muscles contracted with a force that looked almost inhuman, back arching and limbs jerking uncontrollably. He collapsed to the floor with a sickening thud as his veins glowed even brighter. Steam rose from Vittorio's skin, the moisture in his body evaporating from the rapid increase in temperature. His face twisted in sheer agony as the room filled with the smell of burning flesh, and his once pale skin took on a reddened hue, almost as if he were being cooked from the inside out. Ermo watched in shock, his eyes fixed on Vittorio's writhing form. The old man's body twisted and contorted, a grotesque spectacle of agony. The light from his veins grew so intense it became almost blinding. Seizing the opportunity, Ermo tried to struggle against his bonds with renewed vigor. The chains bit into his wrists and ankles, but he ignored the pain. Need to get out of here, fast. Vittorio's screams continued unabated, his body thrashing wildly on the floor. The heat radiating from him was intense, the air around him shimmering with the force of it, making the room feel like an oven. Ermo's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins, spurring him on. With a final push, Ermo managed to break free of the chains, the metal links snapping with a sharp crack that echoed in the room. He pushed himself up, body aching but his mind sharp and clear. Ermo sprinted towards the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the hallway. The cool air hit him like a wave, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the room. His breath came in ragged gasps as he ran, his legs propelling him forward with a desperate urgency. The sounds of Vittorio's screams faded behind him, replaced by the pounding of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Chapter 27 Chance Encounter. Sera walked through the dense market area of the underground arena. The air was filled with the scents of various foods, each stall releasing tendrils of smoke that curled upward through metal grills in the ceiling. She had lost track of Vega, unfortunately, and wasn't quite sure where to look. Despite the throngs of people, a sweet aroma suddenly tickled her senses, cutting through the myriad of other smells. The scent was too alluring to resist, drawing her like a moth to a flame. I need whatever that smell is coming from. Sera immediately followed the scent, weaving through crowds of humans. She dodged a merchant hawking his wares, slipped past a group of animated customers, and finally emerged in front of a small stall. The source of the enticing aroma was a beastkin woman with black hair and fur, evidently very busy at her station. The stall was selling succulent rings of fried dough, golden and crisp. They were dusted with a glistening layer of sugar that sparkled under the sunlight. Some were adorned with a sticky drizzle of honey, while others were sprinkled with finely chopped nuts. Sera's eyes lingered on the tantalizing array of sweets, the sight almost overwhelming her senses. She could practically taste the sugary crunch and feel the warmth of the fresh dough melting in her mouth. I need that. She tried to push through the crowd of people, her lithe form slipping through narrow gaps where she could. She squeezed past a burly man with a booming laugh and ducked under the outstretched arm of a woman haggling for a better price. Despite her agility, it proved nearly impossible to make any real progress. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as Sera waited, her patience wearing thin. The warm, sweet scent teased her, making the wait almost unbearable. She kept her eyes on the stall, watching the beastkin woman behind the counter. She expertly maneuvered around the small space, deftly scooping up dough rings and handing them over one by one. Sera's mouth watered as she watched the dough rings disappear one by one, the supply dwindling with each passing moment. The beastkin woman's fur glistened slightly with sweat, her ears twitching occasionally as she focused on her task. Finally, the crowd thinned enough for Sera to edge her way to the front of the stall. Her excitement, however, quickly turned to disappointment as she reached the counter as it was completely empty, the once bountiful display of confections completely sold out. The Beastkin woman was already packing up, a look of mild annoyance on her face as she glanced at two members of the Black Eagles who were standing nearby. Sera watched as the woman, now carrying an empty basket, was escorted by the two Black Eagle members. Intrigued, Sera decided to follow them, blending into the remaining crowd and using the market stalls and pillars for cover. She moved silently while tracking their every step. The group headed towards a more secluded alley. Sera followed closely with light footsteps, ensuring she remained out of sight. She pressed herself against the wall at the entrance to the alley, peering around the corner to watch the unfolding scene. The two Black Eagles towered over the Beastkin woman. One of them, a tall man, leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "You know the deal, sweetheart. Time to pay up." The Beastkin woman crossed her arms defiantly over her chest. "I've already given you more than enough this week." The second Black Eagle, a burly figure with a cruel smirk, stepped closer, his breath reeking of stale ale. "Don't play coy with us. We know you've been doing well. Hand over our share, or things might get difficult for you." Sera could see the woman's tail bristling with tension, hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This isn't fair at all." The scarred man chuckled darkly, his eyes narrowing. "It ain't supposed to be, now pay up, or else." The Beastkin woman's defiance wavered slightly. With a reluctant sigh, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small pouch of coins before tossing it over to one of the men. "Fine, take it." Sera's curiosity deepened, and a plan formed in her mind. If she could help the Beastkin woman, perhaps she could secure some of those delightful treats for herself. She approached the group stealthily, her movements fluid and silent. The Black Eagles, preoccupied with counting their ill-gotten gains, didn't notice her presence. Just as they finished counting and pocketed the coins, Sera made her move. She reached out and touched both men at the back of their necks. The chill spread rapidly from her fingertips, coursing through their bodies and freezing them in place. The Black Eagles stood rigid, their muscles locked in an unnatural stillness as they froze solid. Immediately after, Sera took off her mask and turned her attention to the Beastkin woman. "I believe you have some confections I was hoping to try." The Beastkin woman's brow furrowed in confusion, ears twitching slightly. "I'm sorry, what?" Sera sighed. "Yes, confections. Those rings of fried dough you were selling, dusted with sugar, drizzled with honey, or perhaps adorned with finely chopped nuts." The Beastkin woman blinked, her confusion melting away into laughter. "You mean donuts? After killing those two, you just wanted donuts?" Sera smiled and nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I'd like some if you could make them again. Although, I expected a bit more of a reaction from you, given the circumstances." The Beastkin woman shrugged. "I'm never going to be sad seeing one of the Black Eagles die, not after what they did to me in my village. Thanks for dealing with them, by the way. Name's Alpa." Sera's surprise was evident. Her eyes widened slightly, and her brows lifted. "Alpa, you say? Do you have a husband?" "I do, why do you ask?" "Actually, I came here with Ermo, he's been looking for you." "Really? Can you tell me where he is?" "He should be." Sera stopped abruptly, her senses suddenly on high alert. The subtle shift in the air, the barely audible sound of footsteps weaving through the crowd, set her on edge. She glanced back, her sharp eyes catching sight of more Black Eagles moving purposefully through the market. Turning back to Alpa, Sera's voice took on an urgent tone. "Do you know a place to hide? I'll manage just fine. If you need to find me, I'll be around this floor." Alpa said. "Good, just hide while I deal with those fools. Best of luck, stranger." As Alpa disappeared into the shadows, Sera pivoted on her heel and sprinted in the opposite direction. Each step she took left a trail of glistening ice beneath her feet, the ground freezing instantly and spreading outward. The icy path crackled and groaned, creating a treacherous surface that slowed anyone attempting to follow her. Sera glanced back, her sharp eyes catching sight of the Black Eagles skidding to a halt as they encountered the unexpected ice. Their faces twisted in frustration and confusion, the slick surface forcing them to move cautiously. They stumbled and slid, their progress significantly slowed. Sera smirked, using the precious seconds gained to increase her lead. She darted through the narrow alleys, her pace steady and deliberate. The maze-like passages of the underground arena twisted and turned, each corner bringing a new challenge. The ice trail she left behind served as both a deterrent and a guide, forcing the Black Eagles to follow her indirectly. Emerging back into the bustling market, Sera was met with a cacophony of noise and chaos. Vendors shouted their wares, children ran underfoot, and the scent of freshly baked goods mingled with the earthy aroma of spices. The sudden appearance of Sera, pursued by the Black Eagles, sent people scattering in all directions, and the once thriving market descended into chaos. Sera leaped behind a nearby stall. She crouched low, peering through the gaps in the wooden structure. Her keen eyes took in the scene before her, assessing the situation. 9 Black Eagles were in pursuit, each one clad in their signature red uniform and armor, their eyes scanning the area with predatory intensity. Each carried a rune-enchanted sword, some of which glowed visibly even while sheathed. Sera's analytical mind quickly calculated the odds. Those swords could prove troublesome, engaging them directly would be unwise without understanding the full extent of their capabilities. She glanced around and soon noticed a stack of barrels near a narrow alley, an idea forming in her mind. I'll separate them, and remove them one by one. Sera picked up a heavy basket of fruit and hurled it towards the barrels. The impact caused a loud crash, drawing the attention of the Black Eagles. She bolted in the opposite direction, slipping through the narrow alley. As expected, 4 of the 9 Black Eagles broke off from the group to pursue her, leaving the others to investigate the noise. The Elder Dryad sprinted down the alley, the 4 Black Eagles followed, armor clanking and swords drawn. She led them through a maze of narrow passages, the walls closing in around them until she reached a dead end, an old storage area filled with crates and debris. She stopped, panting slightly, and turned to face her pursuers. The first Black Eagle lunged at her, his sword crackling with lightning. Sera sidestepped, causing him to slip on a patch of ice she had subtly created. He crashed into a pile of crates, temporarily stunned. The second and third Black Eagles approached more cautiously, swords glowing with different runes, one with fire, the other with a sickly green hue that hinted at poison. Sera backed up, feigning fear, before darting to the side with a sudden burst of speed. Her movement led the pursuing Black Eagles across another ice patch she had conjured. Both men slipped, their legs flying out from under them, landing with heavy thuds on the cold ground. She moved in swiftly, her hands reaching out to touch their armor. The chill spread instantly from her fingertips, a crystalline frost creeping over their metal plates and seeping into the crevices. The ice expanded rapidly, freezing them solid. The fourth Black Eagle hesitated for a moment as he raised his sword, its runes flaring with a bright blue light. Sera lunged forward with a fluid motion, her hand connecting with his wrist before he could strike. The ice spread swiftly, a beautiful but deadly frost pattern racing up his arm. The chilling tendrils encased his entire body, locking him in a sheath of glistening ice. Sera took a moment to catch her breath, looking over the area for any remaining threats. She spotted the first Black Eagle, who had been knocked into a pile of crates, now recovering. He shook off the debris, as he stumbled to his feet. She was on him in an instant, gripping his head with both hands, her fingers digging into his temples. The chill spread from her hands, creeping into his skull. His eyes widened in terror as the ice formed, first freezing his eyes, then spreading into his brain. His screams were cut short as his entire head turned to solid ice, the rest of his body following suit. Sera released her grip, the frozen body falling to the ground with a dull thud. She stood over him, her breath visible in the cold air around her. She took a moment to steady herself, her senses on high alert. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but she knew the others would be searching for her. Moving swiftly and silently, Sera made her way back to another section of the market. She scanned the crowd, her sharp eyes spotting the remaining 5 Black Eagles spreading out. Not many left, this should be quick. The first of the 5 approached, his enchanted sword crackling with energy. Sera used the cover of a nearby stall to her advantage, slipping behind it and waiting for the opportune moment. As he passed, she extended her hand, freezing the ground beneath his feet. He slipped, crashing to the ground, and before he could recover, Sera pressed her palm against his chest, the cold spreading rapidly and encasing him in ice. 4 left. She moved quickly, not giving the others a chance to react. The second Black Eagle noticed her and charged, his blade glowing with a fiery rune. Sera ducked under his swing and slid behind him, her hand reaching out to touch his back. The ice spread swiftly, and he froze mid-motion, his sword clattering to the ground. 3 left. The third and fourth Black Eagles advanced together, trying to use their numbers to their advantage. Sera lured them towards a narrow passage between two stalls, where they had to come at her single file. She created a slick ice patch, and as the first one stepped onto it, he lost his balance. She took the moment to freeze his legs, rendering him immobile, then struck his neck with a precise blow. Two left. The fourth one hesitated, fear evident in his eyes. Sera used this to her advantage, rushing him before he could regain his composure. She grabbed his wrist, freezing his hand to the hilt of his sword, then twisted sharply. The sword fell, and she delivered a swift kick to his chest, sending him sprawling. Her hand met his neck, and the ice followed. Only one left. The fifth and final Black Eagle stood at a distance, watching his comrades fall with growing terror. He turned to flee, but Sera wasn't about to let him escape. She grabbed a heavy pot from a nearby stall and hurled it at him. The pot struck his back, and he stumbled forward, losing his balance. Before he could recover, Sera was upon him. She gripped his hands, her icy touch freezing them in place. He struggled, but her hold was unyielding. She watched as the fear in his eyes turned to desperation, and she felt a cold satisfaction. Sera moved her grip to his neck, the ice spreading from her fingers. His eyes widened in terror as the frost crept up, encasing his throat and cutting off his breath. The ice spread, and soon his entire body was frozen, his lifeless eyes staring into the void. That's all 5. She stepped back, taking a moment to catch her breath and assess the situation. The market was now eerily quiet, the once bustling crowd having fled or fallen silent in the wake of the brutal confrontation. She's over here. Don't let her escape. Just my luck. Sera thought to herself. She turned and sprinted through the maze-like market, weaving between stalls and dodging obstacles with practiced ease. The Black Eagles were hot on her heels, their footsteps pounding on the ground as they pursued her relentlessly. She spotted a metallic corridor ahead and darted into it, hoping to find a way out. Not the best place, but better than nothing. But soon, she reached a dead end. The corridor terminated in a solid metal wall, offering no escape. She spun around, her eyes narrowing as she saw the Black Eagles approaching, their swords drawn and their faces twisted with determination and anger. There's nowhere to run, witch, one of them snarled, his sword glowing with a menacing red rune. Give up now, and we might let you live. Sera smirked as she readied herself. Actually, I like my odds. Chapter 28 to close. Adventurers Guild, Capital Branch. The Demoness pushed open one of the heavy doors and stepped inside the Adventurers Guild. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, with high ceilings and walls lined with maps and various job postings. Long tables filled the center of the hall, cluttered with maps, tankards, and adventurers of all kinds milling about. Zoha made her way through the bustling hall to an empty receptionist desk, carrying a basket filled with freshly baked bread and pastries. She placed her basket on top of the counter and waited patiently. Moments later, the door behind the desk creaked open, and a green-haired elf girl wearing glasses stumbled out, carrying a precarious stack of documents. Elia, are you all right? Zoha asked. The elf girl managed a sheepish smile as she set the documents down on the desk. I'm fine, really. Just a bit off today. Zoha smiled warmly. Here, I brought something for you. She pushed the basket of bread towards Elia. Oh, Zoha, you didn't have to. Thank you so much. Elia reached out to take the basket, fingers brushing against the woven handle. You've always been so kind. It's nothing, I know how hard you work. Consider it a small token of appreciation. Elia beamed, her green hair falling over her eyes as she looked down at the assortment of breads and pastries. These look delicious. It's the least I could do. How has your day been so far? Busy, as always. The paperwork never ends. I can imagine. Zoha said with a light chuckle. By the way, I need to access the guild records for dungeons opened in the last few months. Do you think you could help me with that? Accessing those records requires a petition to the guild master. Then, you'll need to fill out a formal request form, detailing the purpose. I understand the protocol, but I need the data urgently. I have a very fussy client who's pressing for information. Zoha, I really wish I could help, but protocol is protocol. If I bypass the procedures, I could get into serious trouble. Please, just let me in for a few minutes. I promise I won't take long. Elia sighed, the conflict evident in her expression. She glanced around the bustling guild hall, ensuring no one was paying them undue attention. "All right, I'll help you, but you owe me for this." "Thanks, you're the best. Just don't tell anyone else, all right?" "Of course." They descended a narrow staircase, the air growing cooler and the sound of the bustling hall fading away. Then, the two entered a room lined with shelves, each packed with stacks of documents and ledgers. Elia pulled a box from one of the higher shelves. She opened it carefully and extracted a large ledger, placing it gently onto a nearby table. Zoha approached the table, eyes narrowing as she studied the book. "Is this it?" Elia nodded. "Yes, this ledger contains all the information you're looking for." Zoha flipped through the ledger and quickly skimmed through the entries. Every dungeon was meticulously listed with its respective name, date of inauguration, owner, location, and the nearest city. The pages were dense with information, each entry penned in neat, precise handwriting. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trailing over the parchment. One entry detailed a dungeon named Grimhold, inaugurated 3 months prior, owned by Sir Malchus, and located near the city of Ventress. Another entry highlighted Shadowfang Caverns, owned by Lady Tressa, which opened 4 months ago. Zoha looked up from the ledger. "Would it be alright if I had some time alone with this ledger?" Elia's brow furrowed in hesitation. She bit her lip, clearly torn. "You know I trust you, but these records are highly sensitive. If anyone found out I left you alone with them..." Zoha smiled reassuringly. "I understand, but I promise I'll be careful. I just need a bit more time to go through everything. I'll make sure to tidy up and put everything back in place once I'm done." Elia sighed, glancing at the pile of work waiting for her on the other side of the room. "All right, fine, I have a lot of work left to do anyway." "Thank you, Elia. I won't let you down." Elia nodded and began to turn away, but Zoha called out, "Oh, just one more thing. Are there additional copies of this ledger in the other adventurers' guilds?" "There haven't been additional copies made so far. But anyway, I really have to go. Sorry, don't let me keep you." Once alone, Zoha quickly sifted through the ledger again, her eyes darting over the dense, neat entries until she found what she was looking for: Twilight Grove, owned by Countess Ivirus, with the nearest city being Marwood. She carefully placed the ledger on the table, her fingers tracing the delicate script. Zoha reached into her cloak, pulling out a small vial of shimmering white ink and a fine quill. The white ink was no ordinary ink, it was enchanted to erase existing text without leaving a trace. She dipped the quill into the vial, the ink clinging to the tip like liquid moonlight. With meticulous precision, she traced over the entry. The white ink spread smoothly, its magic dissolving the black ink beneath it. The process was slow and exacting, but Zoha remained patient, knowing that any mistake could compromise the entire operation. As the last of the original text vanished, Zoha scrutinized the page to ensure there were no remnants of the erased entry. Satisfied, she switched to a small vial of black ink, this one infused with a binding spell to make the new text indistinguishable from the original. She dipped her quill into the black ink and wrote over the erased entry, her strokes careful and measured. Each letter was crafted to match the surrounding text perfectly, the flow of her handwriting blending seamlessly with the original scribe's work. But Zoha didn't stop there. She knew that a single altered entry might arouse suspicion among any magically sensitive individuals. To mitigate this risk, she identified several other entries throughout the ledger. She carefully repeated the process on these entries, using the white ink to erase the text before meticulously rewriting the same information with the black ink. This would make the alterations appear as intentional edits rather than a targeted forgery. In a few minutes, the ink dried quickly, its enchantment ensuring it bonded with the parchment as if it had always been there. Each modified entry looked identical to the original, maintaining the ledger's overall integrity. Zoha's sharp eyes scanned the page once more, ensuring her forgery was flawless. She inspected each letter to make sure it all aligned perfectly with the other entries. Once she was satisfied, she cleaned her quill and tucked her equipment back into her cloak. She carefully closed the ledger and returned it to its box before placing it back on the shelf. She took a moment to ensure everything was precisely as it had been before she arrived. As the box settled into place, Zoha allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The first part of her plan was complete. The entry was altered, and the ledger appeared untouched. There was only one more task left: convince Countess Ivirus to leave her dungeon untouched for the foreseeable future. Zoha headed back up the narrow staircase to the receptionist desk, her mind still buzzing with the details of her forgery. As she emerged from the stairwell, she saw Elia sorting through a new stack of documents, her green hair falling into her eyes as she worked. "Elia," Zoha called softly, approaching the desk. The LF girl looked up, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Did you find everything you needed?" "Yes, thank you so much for your help." "I really appreciate it," Zoha said. Elia adjusted her glasses and nodded. "I'm glad I could help. Take care, Zoha." Zoha nodded and turned to leave. "You too, thanks again." As Zoha stepped outside the Adventurers Guild, the cacophony of the bustling city enveloped her. The clatter of horse-drawn carts, the murmur of haggling vendors, and the distant laughter of children filled the air. She moved purposefully down the steps, her boots clicking against the stone, but her stride faltered abruptly when she spotted an inquisitor walking toward her. The inquisitor had striking blue hair and piercing red eyes that seemed to bore straight through her. The combination was unsettling, her gaze as intense as a predator's. Zoha tensed, her body instinctively preparing for a confrontation. But instead of an accusation, the inquisitor's voice was calm and almost friendly. "Are you all right? You seem a bit tense." The demoness forced herself to relax, feeling the tension ease from her shoulders. She mustered a smile, though it felt strained at the edges. "Just a bit tired, and I'd like to head home right now." "Good day." The inquisitor nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good day to you." She turned and walked into the Adventurers Guild, her blue hair disappearing into the shadows of the entrance, leaving Zoha to exhale a sigh of relief. Zoha quickly walked away, her pace increasing as she scanned the crowded streets for a safe place to gather her thoughts. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for any sign of danger. She spotted a narrow alleyway between two tall buildings and headed towards it. "I should be able to teleport from here." Just as she was about to enter the alley, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Zoha spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her waist. The inquisitor stood before her once more, a faint smile playing on her lips. Her red eyes gleamed with curiosity, as if she enjoyed the game of cat and mouse. Zoha tensed again, her muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. "Do you need something from me, Inquisitor?" The Inquisitor held up her hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Haziel. I just wanted to introduce myself properly. I know who you are, Zoha. You're an A-rank adventurer with an impressive track record. Your party has a remarkable success rate in high-rank dungeons, with a low casualty rate compared to others. It's true, I've had my fair share of successes. But why does that interest you?" Zoha asked. Haziel's expression remained calm and composed. "I'm conducting an investigation regarding some issues with a certain dungeon, and I would like to get the opinion of a high-ranking adventurer such as yourself." Zoha's suspicion grew, but she decided to play along for now. "Of course, I'd be happy to help. What do you need me to do?" "I just want to ask you a few questions, that's all. It shouldn't take long." "All right, where should we go for this questioning?" Haziel gestured toward the deeper part of the alley. "We can do it right here. It's more private and away from prying eyes." Zoha hesitated, standing still for a moment. The thought of being cornered in the alley set her nerves on edge. Haziel noticed her hesitation and raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" The demoness quickly masked her unease with a smile. "Apologies, it's nothing." She took a step deeper into the alley, her eyes scanning the surroundings for potential escape routes. Haziel followed very closely, stopping only when Zoha was at the edge of the alleyway. "Let's begin. Have you noticed anything unusual in the dungeons you've been exploring recently?" Zoha shook her head. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual challenges and monster activity." Haziel nodded, jotting down notes on a small parchment. "And your past party members? Have any of them exhibited odd behavior or had unexplained absences?" "No, everyone has been reliable and focused on the missions. We work well together and trust each other." "What about any patterns or anomalies in the dungeons? Increased monster activity, strange occurrences?" Zoha's mind raced, crafting a believable response. "There have been a few dungeons with heightened monster activity, but nothing too alarming. It's not unusual for that to happen from time to time." The interrogation continued, with Haziel asking about various dungeons, specific encounters, and any oddities Zoha might have noticed. Zoha lied convincingly each time, her answers smooth and confident, revealing nothing that could implicate her. Haziel paused for a moment, then looked directly into Zoha's eyes, her own eyes narrowing with curiosity. I've heard rumors about your eyes. People say they're quite unique. What's the story behind them? Zoha's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. They're a birth defect. I've had them my entire life. People tend to talk when they see something unusual. A birth defect, you say? Interesting. I've always been curious about that. Yes, it's something I've learned to live with. It's part of who I am. Haziel continued to scrutinize her, then finally seemed satisfied. She put away her notes and looked at Zoha thoughtfully. Thank you for your cooperation. Your insights have been helpful. Zoha inclined her head slightly. I'm glad I could assist. If there's nothing else, I'll be on my way. Haziel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Very well, just stay out of trouble. Zoha turned to leave, but Haziel's voice stopped her. Wait, forgive me, but there is one more thing I wanted to ask. Zoha paused before turning back to face the Inquisitor. Yes. I'm sorry if this seems insensitive, but may I ask why you wear so many bandages? I have a skin condition, the bandages help protect my skin and keep it from getting worse. Haziel's eyes narrowed slightly. I see. There are treatments available for such conditions. I can arrange for you to see a healer. Zoha smiled politely and shook her head. I appreciate the offer, but I've tried various treatments. This is the best way for me to manage it. Haziel stood there for a few seconds, staring at Zoha, her gaze intense. Zoha felt a prickle of unease but kept her smile in place. Is there something else, Inquisitor? No, that's all for now. Farewell. Chapter 29 Narrow Walls. Sera staggered through a grimy, metallic alleyway. She took deep breaths and slumped against the cold metal wall. Black sap oozed from the stumps where her arms had been torn apart, the viscous liquid dripping onto the ground in thick, inky drops. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself, her eyes traveled over the carnage she had left behind. A tide of red-cloaked men and women lay strewn across the alley, their bodies twisted and broken, blood pooling around them. Sera's breathing was ragged, but she kept her cool as her arms began to regenerate. Twisted sinew emerged from the ragged stumps, the raw, fibrous tissue knitting itself together in a display of rapid healing. The sinew twisted and coiled, growing thicker and more defined with each passing moment. Slowly, the grotesque mass softened, the rough texture smoothing out as new flesh formed over it. Pale skin spread across the newly formed muscle and sinew, covering the once raw wounds with a fresh, unblemished surface. Fingers extended, joints realigned, and soon, her arms were whole again, as if they had never been torn apart. Sera flexed her regenerated fingers, testing their strength and mobility as pain subsided. Sera pushed herself off the wall and stood up, the shadowy fabric of her cloak elongating to cover her newly healed arms. She walked slowly towards an open door frame, her bare feet drenched in blood. The Black Eagles had sent in wave after wave of warriors, which was why Sera had allowed both of her hands to be injured in order to use more of her power. The fact that there was no foliage or even soil in the area for her to use certainly made things more difficult than they should have been. When Sera was getting close to the doorframe, she heard a groan. One of the Black Eagle members was pushing himself up from the ground. His hand gripped a spear that pulsed with electrical energy, the faint crackle of electricity filling the air. Determination was etched on his bloodied face as he struggled to stand, every muscle tensed with the effort. Sera stepped forward with cold precision, her bare heel coming down hard on his head. The impact was swift, and the man's screams were cut short as frost spread rapidly from her foot, freezing his skull solid. The chilling sound of ice crackling through bone and flesh echoed briefly before silence fell once more. Once the man was dead, Sera knelt down and turned him over. She spotted a dagger tucked into his belt, its blade still stained with blood. She pulled it free, wiping the blood off on the man's clothing before securing it in her cloak. The weapon was a simple one, but it would be useful for triggering her own abilities when needed. Continuing towards the door frame, Sera's senses remained alert. Her eyes scanned the shadows for any signs of movement. As she stepped into the open space, she was met by a lone Black Eagle member, a woman who pointed her spear at Sera, its tip pulsing with electric energy. Stay back. Sera gestured to the surrounding corpses. Do you really think you stand a chance, human? Your petty spear isn't going to save you. The woman's resolve faltered visibly. She lowered her spear, allowing it to clatter to the ground. Just kill me. Sera approached the woman, leaning in and breathing down her neck. Take me to Vega, or at least, someone who can. The woman nodded slowly. I'll take you to him. The woman led Sera through a series of winding corridors and steep staircases. Occasionally, they passed a Black Eagle member, their dark uniforms blending into the shadows. At the woman's subtle gesture, these guards quickly averted their eyes, pretending not to see Sera. Eventually, they arrived in front of a luxurious ebon door, its surface polished to a high sheen. The rich, dark wood contrasting with the rough stone of the surrounding walls. The woman gestured towards the door and bowed her head. Vega's inside. Sera's expression remained unreadable as she extended her hand. Thank you. Before the woman could react, Sera's grip tightened, and an icy chill spread from her fingers. Frost rapidly encased the woman's hand, the cold traveling up her arm with ruthless speed. The woman gasped, her eyes widening in shock and pain as she fell to her knees, the frostbite creeping further up her limb. Sera's other hand moved with lethal precision, pressing against the woman's neck. The cold spread instantly, freezing the skin and tissue beneath. The woman's breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling as the ice immobilized her. Sera watched impassively as the woman knelt before her, now a frozen statue. She released her grip, stepping back to admire her handiwork for a brief moment before turning her attention to the door. She pushed the door open and was immediately greeted by clouds of thick, purple gas. The air was dense with the scent of various herbs combined with alchemical elements. Poison, nothing particularly impressive though. Inside, Sera saw who she presumed to be Vega lounging casually on a luxurious couch, the opulent fabric contrasting with the grimy surroundings she had just left. He took a leisurely draught from a smoking pipe, the tendrils of smoke curling lazily in the air around him. Vega's black hair was slicked back, and he wore a cloak with the hood pulled down to reveal his sharp, angular features. His skin was pale, almost luminescent, and crisscrossed with intricate purple tattoos that snaked across his face, down his neck. Soon, he put his pipe down and stood up, gaze fixed on Sera. I take it you're the one who's been killing all my employees? Sera closed the door behind her and casually stepped forward. You should thank me, I rooted out all the weaklings from the Black Eagles. Vega stood up and extended a hand forward for a handshake. Well, I'm not the type to hold a grudge. Why don't we call things even for now? Sera considered for a moment whether she wanted to freeze his hand or not. There was nothing in Vega's behavior that would indicate to her that he had hostile intent as of now. He's still unsure as to what to do with me, he'll likely turn hostile sooner than later. For now, Sera reached out and shook his hand. Admittedly, you're more calm about this than I would have thought. Vega chuckled again as he released the handshake and moved back to his couch. No disrespect, but who did you think was sending all those people at you? Let's just say I know when I'm beat, and I'm also not exactly in a rush to die. Sera pulled a wooden chair closer and sat down. If it makes you feel better, I'm here to talk business. Vega shrugged, lounging comfortably on the couch. I don't mind talking business, but I don't enjoy speaking with someone wearing a mask. Sera's voice was cold and steady. I don't enjoy speaking with you either, but here we are. Vega leaned back, his demeanor seemingly relaxed, though his eyes remained sharp and calculating. All right, he said with a shrug, trying to appear nonchalant. I'll concede for now. Why are you here? Sera's eyes remained fixed on him. I wish to take over the Black Eagles for myself. Ambitious, aren't we? Vega said, taking another leisurely puff from his pipe. And what makes you think you can just waltz in here and take over? I've already eliminated many of your members, Sera replied bluntly. That should give you an idea of my capabilities. Vega's smile didn't falter, but there was a coldness in his eyes. Fair point. But surely, you didn't think it would be that simple, did you? I'm not interested in a power struggle. I'm offering you a chance to step down willingly and save your life. And what would I get out of this? Surely, you don't expect me to just hand over everything I've worked for without some form of compensation. That depends, what do you want and what value can you provide? Positions of power within the new Black Eagles, Vega suggested. I could still be useful to you, you know. My knowledge, my connections, they could all be at your disposal. Sera's expression remained stoic. You can have a position, but you'll have to start from scratch, like everyone else. I want the cream of the crop, and if you're truly as useful as you claim, you'll rise anyway. Vega's eyes narrowed slightly, though his tone remained casual. You're quite direct, aren't you? But if you push everyone out, you'll be left with nothing but enemies. It's smarter to keep some of the old guard close, don't you think? No, Sera said flatly. I need loyalty, not treachery disguised as cooperation. I have no use for you if you're not completely under my command. You're making this difficult. You can't expect to take over an organization like the Black Eagles without some form of compromise. I'm not here to compromise. I'm here to take over. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do I need to find someone else who will? Vega took a long, slow drag from his pipe, the smoke curling around him like a lazy serpent. He exhaled, the tendrils of smoke drifting towards the ceiling. This isn't really going anywhere, is it? Sera stood up. If you're not willing to cooperate, then our business is done here. You're right, it is. In an instant, Vega's hand darted into his cloak and took out 2 small black spheres. With a swift flick of his wrist, he hurled them to the ground. They exploded with a sharp crack, releasing a thick, poisonous gas that rapidly filled the room. Sera remained unfazed as the toxic fumes enveloped her. She focused her senses, honing in on Vega's presence amidst the swirling haze. She could feel his movements, sharp and deliberate, as he attempted to take advantage of the cover. Before long, Vega lunged at her with a dagger. Sera sidestepped with fluid grace. Too slow. Vega swung again, his blade cutting through the air, but Sera was already a step ahead. She dodged his attacks with a grace that bordered on effortless, her eyes never leaving his. Vega's frustration mounted as he aimed a swift kick at her midsection. Sera caught his leg mid-strike, her hand gripping his ankle. Ice spread rapidly from her fingers, encasing his leg in frost. Vega yanked his leg free, but the damage was done. Undeterred, Vega switched tactics, throwing a series of punches aimed at Sera's head and torso. She dodged each blow with minimal effort, his fists cut through the air, missing her by mere inches. As Vega overextended with a particularly aggressive jab, Sera saw her opportunity. She ducked beneath his arm before grabbing part of it. Ice spread instantly from her touch, freezing his arm solid in a heartbeat. Vega roared in pain and frustration, trying to pull away, but Sera's grip was unrelenting. She twisted his frozen arm with a merciless efficiency, sending him stumbling backward. He regained his balance quickly, only to find Sera already closing the distance. Sera touched his other arm, the freezing cold locking his limbs in place. The ice spread with a crackling hiss, encasing his muscles and joints in an unyielding grip. Desperation flashed in Vega's eyes as attempted a final, desperate kick aimed at Sera's legs, hoping to topple her. But Sera was ready. She sidestepped his kick with ease, and then used a hand to catch his leg mid-air, freezing it from the knee down. Vega cried out as the ice spread, his leg growing heavy and immobile. His balance faltered, and he crashed to the floor with a thud. He struggled to move, muscles straining against the unyielding frost, but it held him firmly in place. Sera stood over him with a cold expression. She watched as the fight drained out of him, his defiance giving way to resignation. You should have cooperated, Sera said softly. Now, this ends on my terms. Satisfied that Vega was no longer a threat, Sera knelt beside his now still form as she searched through his clothing. The coarse fabric of his tunic rustled as she rifled through the pockets, her expression focused and methodical. She found a few coins, a rusty dagger, and more importantly, a piece of folded parchment. Carefully, she unfolded the note and read its contents. This is my last warning to you, Vega. I know what you've been trying to do behind my back, and if you keep it up, I'll have you killed myself. In other news, I'm going to be dealing with a beastkin shifter from the raid a few months ago. Keep an eye out for any intruders and make sure nobody sticks their noses where they don't belong. Vittorio. Sera folded the paper again and tucked it in her cloak. Looks like Ermo's been captured, I should head down to that prison complex immediately. Satisfied with the information, Sera kept searching through every pocket and fold in Vega's clothing, just in case. Her persistence paid off when she found a small set of keys tucked inside his boot. This should make things easier. Chapter 30 Amaryllis. Sera took out the metal keys she had taken from Vega, their cold surfaces biting into her skin with every touch. The chill seeped into her fingertips, numbing them slightly as she worked. She shot a quick glance at the frozen guards nearby. Frost clung to their lashes and brows while the air around them was heavy with the remnants of their last breaths, hanging in a misty cloud that barely moved. Doesn't look like I'll have anyone bothering me anytime soon. After a few tries, Sera selected the correct key, its jagged edges fitting perfectly into the worn lock. As she inserted it, she felt the mechanism resist for a moment before it yielded with a satisfying click. The heavy door groaned in protest as it swung open, the sound echoing through the otherwise silent corridor. Cold air rushed out to greet her, carrying with it the stale, oppressive scent of decay. Although, surprisingly, each cell was empty with not a single prisoner remaining. How odd, one would expect to find at least some individuals in such a place. Sera stepped forward, her boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the stone floor as she advanced down the corridor. The silence was oppressive, the emptiness unsettling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her eyes scanned the cells, searching for any sign of life, but there was nothing, just cold iron and shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. As she neared the end of the corridor, a sudden burst of movement caught the edge of her vision. Sera's body tensed, her senses heightening as she instinctively turned, just in time to see Ermo running down the stairs. His breaths came in quick bursts as he reached her. "Boss, we need to run." "Slow down, tell me what's going on." "Boss, there's..." Before he could finish his sentence, a deafening explosion tore through the air. The blast hurled them both to the ground, sending a jarring pain through their bodies. Dust and debris rained down around them, filling the corridor with a suffocating cloud of chaos. The acrid smell of smoke mingled with the scent of burning wood and stone, creating a thick, choking haze. Through the swirling fog, a monstrous silhouette took shape, slowly emerging from the billowing smoke. At first, it was just an ominous mass against the swirling grey. But as it drew closer, the form became more distinct, a towering beast composed entirely of writhing purple flames. The creature's massive frame thudded heavily against the ground as it landed, sending tremors through the floor. The beast's eyes burned through the haze, locking onto them with an intense, predatory focus. A sinister grin spread across its flaming maw, the edges of its mouth curling upward in a grotesque, mocking expression. It chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed ominously through the corridor. "Trying to run away? Pathetic." Ermo's legs trembled as he forced himself up. His chest heaved as he stared at the creature before them. Sera, however, remained unfazed. She rose beside him calmly, her gaze fixed steadily on the fiery beast. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in cold, calculating determination. "What in the world did you do to become like this?" The beast snorted, a violent expulsion of air that sent sparks flying in all directions. "I was once but a man named Vittorio, but now, I'm on the verge of becoming something so much more." For the next few seconds, Sera didn't say a word. She took the time to think, trying to gauge how much of Vittorio's words were actually meaningful. Unfortunately, it would appear that he's actually become closer to the legendary beast kings of old rather than just an ordinary shifter. Still, I can't let him notice any sort of fear in me. I'm not afraid of an abomination like you. And I'm not the one you should fear. Suddenly, Vittorio unleashed a guttural howl that ripped through the air with a primal, bone-chilling intensity. Immediately after, Ermo clutched his head as the howl invaded his mind. His muscles twitched under the strain of an invisible force. He fell to his knees, the stone beneath him cracking under the sudden pressure of his weight. His form started to shift and contort, bones audibly cracking as they realigned. His features twisted grotesquely, the pain etched deep into every line of his face as his muscles bulged unnaturally, the sinews beneath his skin straining as if trying to escape. Sera reflexively reached out and touched his throat, intending to use her frost magic to subdue the transformation before it could fully take hold. But the moment her fingers brushed his skin, she recoiled in shock. His flesh was searing hot, the intense heat radiating from him burning her fingertips almost instantly. The frost she tried to conjure evaporated before it could even begin to take hold. The air around Ermo seemed to draw inward, the atmosphere tightening with an almost tangible pressure. Then, with a violent surge, a burst of raw energy erupted from Ermo's body. The force of it was so intense that it seemed to warp the space around him, the shockwave radiating outward in a rippling wave. Sera was caught in the blast, and was hurled through the air like a rag doll before crashing against the floor with a sickening thud. The impact shattered her right arm and tore through part of her leg. The world spun around her, her vision narrowing to a tunnel of searing light and overwhelming agony. The sharp sting of pain radiating through Sera's body like shards of glass embedded in her body. "Not like this, no, I must stand." Then, from torn flesh and shattered bones, dark tendrils emerged. They were thick and sinuous, their surface slick with a glossy, almost oily sheen. The tendrils writhed and twisted, moving with a life of their own as they snaked outwards and searched for one another. Pale flesh reknit itself around the dark, pulsating cords, forming anew as if being sculpted by some unseen hand. Every fibre of her being screamed in protest, but Sera did not falter. Her jaw clenched tighter as she forced herself to endure the torment. When the tendrils completed their work and reformed her limbs, Sera pushed herself up, the freshly formed appendages tingling with a strange, electric sensation. This will have to do. Vittorio leaped to her side, his flaming form casting a hellish glow over everything. I certainly hope you weren't relying on your little beastkin friend in order to defeat me. Then, he unleashed a roar that pierced the air, a primal command that reverberated through the surroundings. Ermo responded instantly, charging towards Sera with terrifying speed. Sera tried to duck, but she was just a fraction too slow. Ermo's massive jaws descended with terrifying speed, snapping shut around her. The moment his sharp teeth pierced her body, a searing pain exploded through her body, hot and immediate. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat as the pain radiated outward from the points of impact. In an instant, she was lifted off the ground, body jerked violently upward as Ermo's powerful head twisted. The world around her spun in a chaotic blur, her vision a dizzying whirl of shadows and flickering light. The sharp jolt of the motion sent fresh waves of pain coursing through her, each twist and turn of Ermo's head intensifying the agony. Every nerve in her body screamed as she felt herself being dragged deeper into the darkness. The constricting walls of Ermo's throat closed in around her, the pulsating flesh pressing against her from all sides. Sera blinked a few times as she adjusted to her new surroundings. The damp, heavy air filled her lungs with a familiar, earthy scent. She found herself standing in the middle of a swamp she knew all too well. The ground was soft and spongy, covered in a thick layer of moss and decaying leaves. Tall, twisted trees rose up around her, their gnarled branches intertwining above to form a dense canopy that filtered the weak, grey light from the sky. I've been here before. The water beneath her feet was murky, a dark greenish-brown that obscured anything lurking below the surface. She could see the reflections of the trees and the occasional ripple as something unseen disturbed the water. Sera took a cautious step forward, her foot hovering just above the water's surface as a layer of ice spread out from where she stood, creating a path of frozen water beneath her feet. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, the ice cracking slightly with the weight of her passage but holding firm. Suddenly, she stopped dead in her tracks. A sense of dread washed over her as she tried to pierce the thick fog that clung to the swamp like a shroud. She squinted, focusing on the shadowy figure partially obscured by the dense undergrowth. When the fog shifted slightly, the figure came into clearer view. It was Winter, still impaled on a series of black, gnarled roots that twisted around her like a macabre sculpture. The dark wood had pierced through her body at multiple points, anchoring her in place, yet she remained conscious, eyes sharp and unsettlingly aware. Winter's lips curled into a smirk, a chilling expression that contrasted starkly with her dire situation. The smirk was not one of pain or fear, but that of amusement and defiance, as if even in this state, she held some secret power. This was despite the fact that her skin was marred by the dark blood that oozed slowly from her wounds. Sera approached cautiously. How are you even still alive? Winter shook her head and chuckled. Alive? It's impossible to kill someone who is already dead. Sera's brows furrowed as she looked around, taking in the desolate surroundings. The absence of the usual threats made the swamp feel even more ominous. Why are all the abominations gone? Do you even know where this place truly is? How would I know? You didn't tell me when I asked you before. Winter chuckled again. It's good that you remember your previous time here. It means that you are ready to know the whole truth. What are you talking about? Calm down, Sera, and think. Sera clutched her head as a sharp pain shot through her skull. I remember everything. You tried to warn me, and then you were impaled on those roots. Don't worry, because of your near-death, you managed to enter this place without going through the spirit tree. At least for the near future, we're safe from its influence. Winter said. How is that even possible? Each and every Elder Dryad is connected to the spirit tree. Because this place is the Long Death. It was originally a void where the spirit tree threw away everything it deemed unworthy. But I survived, and hopefully, you will never have to stay here for as long as I did. Sera sighed, pausing for a moment to gather her thoughts before looking directly at Winter. Was it truly the spirit tree that killed you? Without a moment's hesitation, Winter answered, yes. The simple word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sera felt a shiver run down her spine, the weight of the revelation settling over her. How much more has the spirit tree hidden from me? Tell me, why did the spirit tree try to kill you and hide the truth from me? Because the spirit tree is afraid of our potential and what we could become. Could you elaborate? I'll answer your question with a question of my own. Do you know what the spirit tree actually is? It's the origin of all life, is it not? The source, the ultimate truth. An expected answer, and not entirely incorrect, but there is more that you need to know. Winter extended a hand toward Sera, her fingers like frost-kissed porcelain. Would you mind holding my hand? Sera raised an eyebrow as she considered the figure before her. The air between them felt charged, like the tense calm before a storm, each second stretching longer as she weighed her options. I suppose it's worth putting my trust in her, at least for now. Finally, she extended her hand and clasped Winter's outstretched fingers. The moment their hands connected, Winter's body emitted a soft light that constantly pulsed with chilling energy. The black roots that had cruelly impaled Winter started to retreat, slowly at first, then with growing speed, inch by inch slithering back into the earth from which they had emerged. The movement was almost hypnotic, the roots unwinding from Winter's body as if releasing her from a twisted curse. As the roots withdrew, the wounds they had left behind healed rapidly. The gashes that marred Winter's pale skin were soon covered by delicate layers of ice. Gradually, the ice crystals started to melt, the frost turning into droplets that slid down her skin, leaving it smooth and unblemished. The once impaled Dryad now stood before Sera as pristine as freshly fallen snow, her body whole and untouched by the horrors it had just endured. Winter released Sera's hand, the chill lingering for just a moment longer before it too dissipated. Thank you for that. Sera tilted her head. To be completely honest, I'm not sure what I did to you. Winter shrugged and turned around. I just borrowed a bit of your strength, that's all. Interesting, I wasn't aware that energy vampirism is an ability that us Dryads could use. Once you've had your second reawakening, you'll be able to do it too. But enough talk, there is a place we need to be. Sera followed Winter through the swamp, until they reached a pond with water so clear it seemed otherworldly. The surface was smooth and reflective, like a perfect mirror framed by moss-covered rocks. Look into the water, Winter instructed. Remember what you see, so that you will know what must be done in the future. Sera knelt by the pond, her reflection mingling with the soft ripples. She peered into its depths, the clear water drawing her in. The surface shimmered, distorting her features briefly before settling into clarity. As she gazed deeper, images formed, sharp and vivid, as if she were watching memories etched into reality itself. In the beginning of all creation, Winter began, there were only two entities, Zorian and Sera. They were primordial forces, embodiments of light and dark, locked in an eternal struggle. Their clashes were so intense that they birthed the heavens and the underworld. Sera's eyes widened as the pond revealed the colossal figures of Zorian and Sera. Zorian radiated brilliant light, his form pulsating with celestial energy, while Sera was a shadowy behemoth, her darkness deep and consuming. Their titanic battles forged brilliant stars and yawning voids. The heavens glowed with ethereal light, while the underworld seethed with dark, turbulent energy. Eventually, the heavens became populated by angels, beings of pure light. The underworld, in stark contrast, was filled with demons, creatures born of shadow. To govern these realms, Zorian created gods and goddesses to serve the heavens. Meanwhile, Sera fashioned demon lords to rule the underworld. Their constant fighting gave birth to the material world. The heavens and the underworld's clashes created a new plane of existence, a world teeming with potential and life. Naturally, Zorian and Sera decided to make this world their plaything as well, creating all manner of animals, plants, and mortal races to inhabit it. The pond's surface shimmered, revealing a vibrant world taking shape. Lush forests sprouted, their canopies reaching toward the heavens. Towering mountains rose majestically, their peaks piercing the sky. Vast oceans formed, their waters teeming with life. Animals of all shapes and sizes roamed the land, from the tiniest insects to the grandest beasts. Zorian created humans, elves, and dwarves, while Sera brought forth the beastkin and dark elves. For the longest time, Winter continued, Zorian and Sera were equally matched. Their battles raged across the heavens and the underworld, each side gaining and losing ground in an endless cycle of conflict. But one day, with the help of one of the gods he created, Zorian managed to mortally wound Sera in one of their conflicts. The water revealed the climactic battle, Zorian striking a decisive blow with the aid of a formidable god, whose presence radiated sheer power. Isera's form shuddered, her dark energy wavering as her strength ebbed away. But before Isera met her final demise, she expended the remnants of her formidable strength on 2 final acts. The first was a plague, born from her all-consuming malice, which obliterated every last god and goddess in existence and forced Zorian to go into hiding indefinitely. The second, more enduring act, was the creation of her legacy, the spirit tree. Sera watched intently as Isera poured the last remnants of her essence into the earth. As the shimmering energy seeped into the soil, the ground trembled. A small sprout broke through the surface, unfurling rapidly as if time itself had been accelerated. The sprout quickly grew, its roots burrowing deep into the earth with a quiet determination, anchoring themselves firmly in the fertile soil. The trunk thickened and expanded, twisting and turning as it stretched upward, reaching for the heavens with an almost desperate yearning. And as the tree continued to grow, silvery leaves sprouted from its branches. Sera turned to Winter with a contemplative expression as she processed the scene before her. Is there a reason why Isera wants the Elder Dryads to die after they have served their purpose? Winter's lips curved into a slight smile. What do you think the purpose of an Elder Dryad is? An Elder Dryad's duty is to serve the spirit tree and nurture it, as well as the dungeons connected to it. That's only half of the story. After spending far too long in this wretched swamp, I've come to the conclusion that the true role of an Elder Dryad is to become a vessel for Isera's rebirth. If that's true, I still don't understand why the spirit tree would kill Elder Dryads if that's the case. Sera said. Winter's expression grew more somber. Isera desires a pliant vessel, one that is powerful yet unaware of their true circumstances. Every Elder Dryad that came before you, including myself, eventually came to realize our true purpose. Once we understood, we became a threat to the spirit tree's control, hence why we were eliminated. Sera stepped away from the pond, turning to Winter, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Will I die permanently now that you've told me this? Winter's expression softened. The spirit tree shouldn't know that you are aware of the truth, at least for now. But you must be careful in the future, especially when you merge with the spirit tree. Clear your mind and never think of what you now know. Sera tilted her head, skepticism evident in her gaze. Will that really work, or will it just delay the inevitable? It's the latter. However, even if the spirit tree becomes aware that you know the truth, it is unlikely to kill you anytime soon. It is too weak and dependent on you. If that's the case, what can I do to ensure my survival? Unfortunately, you must continue growing the spirit tree for now to gain more power. And perhaps, once you are strong enough, you can try to ascend to divinity yourself in order to challenge the spirit tree. Divinity? How would I even begin going about doing that? For now, just continue to grow stronger. We shall speak again when you are ready. But will I not just die the same way you did, or like the other Elder Dryads before me? No, because unlike me and the other Elder Dryads, you discovered the truth early. You are the exception to the rule. Sera pondered for a moment before asking, could the other Elder Dryads talk to their predecessors? Winter laughed, a sound like brittle ice cracking. I've only spoken to the other Elder Dryads in the swamp, meaning, after their death. None of them could speak to me during their lifetimes. Can I at least meet the other Elder Dryads? Sera asked. Winter's expression grew serious, the jovial light in her eyes dimming. The air around her seemed to still, as if the entire swamp was holding its breath. You still have more important things to do, Sera, it's time for you to leave. Sera's gaze wandered, taking in the swamp around her. She noticed the edges of the swamp fading into an inky void, the familiar landscape dissolving into an abyss that pulsed with an unspoken warning. It appears my time here is limited after all. A sigh escaped Sera's lips, a soft exhalation that barely disturbed the heavy air. How can I leave the swamp now that there's no portal for me to use? Winter's eyes gleamed with an enigmatic light, a fleeting smile playing at the corners of her lips. That is quite simple, really. All you must do is utter my name. You mean your true name, correct? Precisely, speaking it will grant you a measure of my strength, if only temporarily. Winter stepped into the pond, the water rippling around her feet with a soft, melodic lapping. She moved gracefully, each step barely disturbing the glassy surface. As she reached the center, she turned to face Sera with serene determination. Slowly, Winter clasped her hands together, the gesture deliberate and ritualistic. The air around her seemed to grow colder, the temperature dropping as an aura of frost emanated from her. My name is Amaryllis, she declared, her voice ringing with authority. Herald of Winter and First of the Dryads.